Good morning, everybody. We're about to get started for our TBARTA meeting for the Finance Committee. At this time, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order promptly at 9 o'clock. May we have the Pledge of Allegiance and then roll call. Flag over there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all so very much. May we have roll call, please, to make sure that we have a quorum?
Okay, Commissioner Renee Flowers,
Present.
Commissioner Janet Long, Commissioner Jeff Holcomb,
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey, Jim Holton.
Present.
Okay, we do have a quorum.
Thank you so very much. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? Anyone in the audience, anyone online? No one for public comment. So we'll move forward to the consent agenda items. Have you all had an opportunity to read the minutes that were in fact provided to us, and they're also available if you have your laptops, if you need a moment to review. If you don't need a moment to review, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion and second for approval of the minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Do we have any that are opposed? The minutes have been approved. Moving on to our information items. Any information can't even get it out. Any information items? January financials.
Morning.
Good morning. You're green.
Yes,
Okay.
okay, great. So, yes, I want to go over the financials for the month of March.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so for the end of month of March, we had a net surplus of 392,000, and this was 42,000 under the budgeted amount of 434,000. So looking at the revenues, we're still under budget about 619,000, and this is primarily due to the guideless technology study. And then along with the expenses, 577,000, and that is due to the consulting related to that study. Looking over to the balance sheet here, our accounts receivable balance was 527,000 at the end of March. Our accounts payable balance was 346,000. And at the end of March, we had approximately $898,000 in the bank. And that just concludes the summary of the report.
Thank you. And thank you for the summary that you provided that's written here, highlighting those areas in red that you wanted us to focus in on. Are there any questions? And I do apologize for saying January financials. I was looking at the minutes, not at the agenda. Do we have any questions by any of the board members related to the March financial? Do I have a motion to receive the March financials? Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Moving on to the Office Lease. I'm excited to hear about this, Mr. Green.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. I reported our last meeting that Jennifer Cowan and I were negotiating with the landlord, and what's in your packet this morning are the final terms and conditions that we reached. It's for 64 months, which is basically 5 years plus 4 additional months of free rent. Base rent starts at $26.50 a square foot and totals $281,687 for the term. Additional rent is also charged as a proportional share of any annual increase in operating expenses and property taxes. TBARTA has the right to terminate for loss of funding, but would have to reimburse landlord for all unamortized improvements, free rent, and commission that they paid. No security deposit is required, and our federal funds can be used to cover the cost of lease payments. This final draft addresses all the issues we identified during the review process, and our recommendation is to approve the lease with Tampa Eisenhower LLC.
Great job, team. Do we have any questions or comments by any of the board members related to the lease terms and conditions? All right. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
We have a motion with a second to approve the lease. We'll finally have a home. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Do we have any that are opposed? Motion approved. Thank you so very much for working on that and getting it done. And I guess we have good credit since we didn't have to pay a deposit. So we are thankful for that. Next, we have the interlocal agreement for financial contributions. Ms. Gowan?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
By way of a brief background, the board approved moving forward with an interlocal agreement and directed council to draft that interlocal agreement. It was drafted and circulated to the 7 entities legal counsel. And now before you is the interlocal agreement with any comments that were received from those other legal counsel or other entities legal counsels for your consideration today. By way of a brief overview, the interlocal agreement is for the financial contributions of the 5 counties and 2 cities set to begin in the fiscal year 2023. On each October thereafter, the contributor, each contributor shall contribute 17 cents per capita on the population, according to the most recent estimates of that contributor's population. TBARTA will invoice each contributor each month for that, or I'm sorry, will invoice the contributor, I should say, for that payment. Each contributor's obligation is, of course, limited to, in any given year, to the ability to appropriate and pay from legally available funds. The liability for both TBARTA and the contributors is limited to their respective employees' actions within the scope of employment and limited, of course, pursuant to sovereign immunity. Any contributor may withdraw from the agreement by notifying the others within 30 days. The agreement will become effective on the date of filing with the 5 clerks of the circuit courts. And there are other standard provisions, which are just your normal garden variety legal provisions of severability, notice, compliance with law. And if there is a dispute between any of the entities, it will be resolved in accordance with the dispute resolution process outlined in Chapter 164. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this question is probably for David and/or Melanie. For the record, could you please read into the record the contributions from our member partners? The proposed.
The proposed for each county?
Mhm.
Okay, so on here, Hernando, it's $33,067.55. Hillsborough is $248,159.54. Manatee is $67,950.70. Pasco, $95,521.47. Pinellas, $163,048.19. The city of St. Petersburg, $45,526.34. And Tampa, $69,291.83, with a total of $722,565.62 is proposed.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I have a follow-up. David, how many of these commission and cities have you made presentations to with regard to where we are with TBARTA, where we've been, where we are, and what we're anticipating doing?
We have not made any presentations to these governing bodies.
Are you planning on making presentations to them?
We have not coordinated any presentations, nor have we been asked to.
For the record, Madam Chair, I think it's really important that TBARTA make formal presentations to each of those entities that outlines where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, if in fact you want this money from them. I don't think it's fair to rely on the electeds who sit on these different boards to speak for the agency. We're beginning our budget process now in Pinellas County. I can't speak for the rest of them, but all of the departments that request dollars from the Pinellas County Commission comes before us in a workshop and a meeting to make the presentation about why this money is so critical. And I think I ask this every single year, but I do think it's very important. I don't know about my colleagues. I'm not going to speak for them, but I would appreciate it if you could get on the agenda, please. Our chair is Commissioner Justice. Thank you.
That's a good idea. Do we have any comments in that regard to Mr. Holden?
Chair, thank you. I'll second the motion by Commissioner Long. I think it's vital that we present to all the participant governments involved in this to bring them up to speed on what's going. And then I had a question too,
Yes, sir.
Chair. David, I understand there's an indication from the city of Tampa that they wish to not sign this agreement or they don't have the resources to pay. Can you elaborate on that?
That's correct. They indicated that they do not have the financial resources to pay the contribution that's being asked of them.
Yeah, and are they going to sign the agreement but not pay, or are they going to just
They
not?
haven't indicated anything about signing the agreement. They just indicated that they're unable to pay.
And to that point, did you or anyone from TBARTA give a presentation to the city of Tampa council regarding TBARTA's activities?
Not to the council. Councilman Dingfelder and I met with some city staff representing Mayor Castor. We talked to them about the situation, and they came back with the same response as they initially gave us, which is they just didn't have the financial capacity to contribute.
Thank you.
Commissioner Long. And then
Well, frankly, I find that quite interesting considering the fact, and I could be wrong, and I do see our state advocacy person sitting here. Maybe he can speak to it as well. But to me, I seem to recall that the city of Tampa and the city of St. Petersburg are bound by statute to belong to TBARTA. And this has been a longstanding arrangement between the city and TBARTA. And it doesn't send a good message that you, David, have not been to make a presentation to that council. Talking to one person or whoever it was you spoke with is not going to cut it. And I would venture to say that this is a slippery slope if we don't get ahead of it very quickly. And maybe you can speak to that, Ron, I don't know, or David or whoever, but to me, it's a problem.
thank you. And then you next, and then.
Hi, this is Commissioner Overman. I hear you because I've been because I don't sit on this committee normally, but I do sit in the regular board. I've been asking, so what is Hillsborough being asked to contribute? Because it wasn't necessarily identified in the draft language, because the question for the document was, is there any legal issue or question or comments that you'd like to provide? Well, the only question I had was, how much money are you asking for? So, and given that Hillsborough County, between the city of Tampa and Hillsborough County, provide 317 or are being asked for 317,380, if my math is correct, which is almost half of the budget of TBARTA being proposed. Yeah, probably would be a very good idea to come to Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa to address those concerns. HART's not in that, but HART would play a part in probably any shared cost or project in some degree. So, but they're not on the list either. So I sit on this board as an appointee of HART rather than the other chair of the Board of County Commission hat. But speaking with both of those hats on at the moment, I think it would be wise to help our partners that provide financial support for a regional transportation effort to have a good understanding on the strategy that is being deployed or considered and how it impacts each of the receptive partners in this particular thing, especially as we go into budget season, because $248,000 isn't something that we just go, yeah, I can sign that check. So I would recommend that is to get on the board's calendar and Hearts too. Even though they're not a financial contributor, having Hearts Board truly understand what's happening at the regional level, I think would be beneficial for the board members, for the transit agencies that actually that are part of this. So yeah, in line with that. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
You're welcome, Commissioner Holcomb.
So I guess Commissioner Long, a little clarification. More information is always better. That's a baseline. But are you looking at this as each board going out and approving this? Because I sit on multiple boards and I know the medical examiner board. There's a couple other boards that you know, the Hernando County Commission contributes to, and we don't have the medical examiner come and you know, give us some of the purposes of what she's doing. It's just kind of, it just happens as a normal part of the budget. But you know, a presentation would always be great. But that would be very disappointing because we're regional transit. That's why we're here. And if someone's not contributing because they're not feel like they're being represented, then I'm sure Mr. Green would, you know, make that arrangements that they could be here, but it's almost the same group of us that are here every time. You know, so we're here, we're doing the work and traveling, making our schedules available. So hopefully they'll be here and see the value in this because, you know, if there's expansion, creation of roads in Pasco, Hillsborough, Pinellas, I think that benefits the citizens of Hernando County. That's why I'm here. Hopefully, you know, your citizens may be traveling to, you know, you can now drive up the expressway all the way through middle of Citrus County. So if folks from your region, and I know they do, they travel to Tallahassee. So that's a benefit to the citizens of your community. So when we're thinking regional transit, you know, if we're not on board, then they don't get a seat at the table and they don't get to play. But I think it's a disservice to their citizens, city and county, because, you know, we may be thinking my residents in Hernando County, your residents in your counties, but really anytime we're increasing the capacity of roads or building new roads like they are in Ridge Road in Pasco County, 52 is being expanded by 75. I think that's great for the entire region. So I would just hope folks would look at that.
I think Mr. Holcomb, did you have any?
Just one follow-up, and again, I echo those exact comments again. And I will say, having dealt in this process, Chair, for some time, the legislature takes a keen look at the fact that one of the major players on the board chooses to kind of opt out, and that sends a very poor message, I think, for the concept of regionalism, for our Tampa Bay community, if one of the big people on this board do not get involved and pay as the way everyone else pays.
Councilmember Deborah Fix Sanders and then Commissioner Long.
Good morning, everyone. I am Councilmember Deborah Fix Sanders here instead for Mayor Kenneth Welch. This is my first meeting and I want to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I have to wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Long, and I want to thank Mr. Green for updating me. Although I missed the initial start of the meeting, I'm quite aware of the discussion as to where we are. And we discussed one of our major players not really wanting to participate in this initiative. My question is for Commissioner Long, are you looking for, in your request, can you give us a timeline? Because we actually had our first budget workshop yesterday as well. So we would probably need to get a commitment if Mr. Green is going to make a presentation to do it sooner than later. And I will be glad to help you to arrange that conversation. On behalf of the city of St. Petersburg, and I'm going to speak in turn in regards to us being a major player, and we were just noted here as a part of that agreement, I would think that everyone would want to be a player in this regional effort. And I do think that once conversations are had, mindsets and decisions can be changed. So if we can have that, the more information, the better. We are adequate in taking the information back as representatives of TBARTA. But when we're addressed with an issue as valuable as this and as important as this, I do agree that maybe a presentation would be worth having and spending that time And again, I thank everyone that's here, that's participating, that's making the time and the schedule, but sometimes there's a little essence that needs to be added to what it is that we're trying to get done. So with that being said, you gave me the information. I'm sure Mayor Welch has it, but I think additional conversations and the presentations to the different boards and committees and councils would be beneficial. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Commissioner Long?
Yes, and first I'd like to, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to answer Commissioner Holcomb's question to me. Absolutely, yes, that is my intent. Our medical examiner in Pinellas County not only conducts the medical exams of our deceased in Pinellas County, they also do it for Pasco County. And every single year, he makes a presentation to our commission about his budget. Secondly, I have been a member of TBARTA and advocated for regional transportation since TBARTA was originally created in 2006, which is when I was first elected to the House of Representatives. And so I'm very familiar with regional transportation and how critical it is, not only for our region, but for the entire state of Florida. I am troubled by the fact that I am always asking for a presentation to our county commission. I also sit on Forward Pinellas in our county, and we still have county commissioners on that board, that sat on that board, who are wanting to know, what does TBARTA do? What have they accomplished? And, you know, I have not been shy about my critiques of TBARTA, and it's, I'm not going to repeat all of that today, but to me, we absolutely need these presentations to our commissions and our cities, because having an individual conversation is one thing. When you have it in a public meeting, you hear thoughts and concerns from your colleagues that you may not be thinking of. And I think it's an opportunity for TBARTA and its administrative staff to be better going forward than they are today. So, I mean, I'm only one person here, but that's where I sit, and I sit on the County Commission in Pinellas, and God willing, I am the rising chair for next year, and I will absolutely be expecting a presentation from any organization that wants substantial dollars from our budget. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Overman. And I hear you very loud and clear, and I do know that when a representative such as myself is appointed by the rep, and I'm representing in this case Hart's hat, but I also serve as the chair of the Board of County Commission. So as that, typically, if I were a representative of the Board of County Commission, I would submit the minutes, all the information. It would end up in the back of our agenda as a report. If anybody read it, that would be wonderful. But, you know, it's in the back of the report as my participation here, but it isn't necessarily on the agenda for discussion other than, you know, a request for dollars. And so, but the whole board has to authorize that. The whole board has to approve that. So to your point, it would probably be appropriate, given that it's a financial transaction, in our case, that exceeds the county administrator's decision-making level, that it would be an agenda item and that would give you an opportunity to present. And I am putting on my BOCC hat. Let me know when you're ready, because I need to put it on the agenda. And our agenda is really messy right now, although very good in the last week. So I think that if there is a recommendation, a policy recommendation to schedule, usually about this time is when we start putting together our preliminary budgets, that any relative presentations or workshops that occur would give you an opportunity to do presentations. But if outside of that scope, scheduling some time certain to do a presentation on TBARTA's mission, goals, ask, terms, and opportunities, I think would be very valuable experience. And so, but I also, Hart's not on the list. And they don't currently, our transit agency is not on the list. They're not a member. They are statutorily or financially, not that they could be right now anyway. But given that I'm wearing the heart hat, and there's a very large element associated with transit in this agenda and this mission for this organization. While it's not a financial ask, it would probably be a good idea to put on a reminder to schedule a presentation to the Board of Heart, because there is overlap significantly in Hillsborough County between the Board of County Commission and the Heart Board, given there's 5 members on the Heart Board, or four members, I think.
I don't have a problem with what has been asked, which is just to simply make a presentation for Pinellas comes before us and makes a presentation and other entities. So I don't have a problem with that. The question I have for today is because I was also disappointed when I had my conversation that Tampa did not want to participate financially. I'm not saying that they have a whole lot of money, but compared to their overall budget, $69,000 is a drop in the bucket. It's really not that significant where it's going to cut out a major program. So I was pretty disappointed in that. So I have 2 questions. The first is, since Mr. Dingfelder is no longer representing here and they have replaced Mr. Dingfelder, have they also shared with you if that person, if she will be replacing him on this board, or if they're going to select someone else?
They are in the process of selecting someone. They haven't identified who the individual is yet.
Okay, because I know we made that arrangement that if the mayor would not be present, because actually it is the mayor that is on this committee, then that person would be serving in their stead. And that way we would be at least able to have those communications. So thank you for letting me know that. And if we can just follow up and see when that person will be coming here, that would be fabulous. The other is, since they have indicated that they're not willing to, and I know you told me you spoke to the mayor, and then you had another meeting with the group that you were instructed to have a meeting with. That's why he had the meeting with those individuals. Should we remove their proposed amount from this overall budget, since this is proposed, but they've already said they're not going to pay it? So, yes, ma'am.
Is it on?
You're on.
Yeah.
You're on.
I haven't thought about that, Commissioner Flowers, but in the big scheme of things, I'm not sure I think that's a great idea, because if all it takes is to renege on a state statute that you don't want to do it, or you don't feel like doing it, that's problematic. I mean, what happens if we all decide, hey, we can use that money someplace else? And not to throw stones, but it isn't helpful when a member who is supposed to be here hardly ever shows up. You can't possibly keep your fingers on the pulse of what's going on. And that's part of the problem as I sit here looking at the big picture. Of course, they don't see the value. They say that by their absence, meeting after meeting after meeting, don't you think?
Well, I will say that, first of all, I am grateful for everyone that thinks it important enough. You either requested to be on this committee or you were appointed, and you're taking it seriously in your attendance and your presence and following up on the information and being able to have a dialogue and discussion in this manner speaks volumes. The reason I ask that is just for a numerical standpoint. It's just like your checkbook at home. If you don't have it, you don't include it. So I'm not saying I want to give them, good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm not saying that I want to give them a pass if in fact it is statutorily required that they are a member of TBARTA and that they come in financially. I was looking at it simply from a reporting standpoint, because our books then would share that we have, or we've asked for or proposed 722,000 and change, when in actuality, we've already been told they're not going to pay it. I mean, I don't know what teeth we have to make them pay it. So that's why I asked. I just simply asked from a accounting standpoint, because what we're going to pass today includes $69,000, of which we know that they've already said they're not going to pay. So, yeah, you got to push a little thing. There you go.
Just because they started out that way maybe a little more effort on our part would encourage them to dig a little deeper to find those dollars.
I think they have the dollars. I just think that the desire is not to pay.
Chair,
Could we have someone actually search to assure that statutorily, because you said you asked a question and I don't know the answer.
Well, it
So
is
can
in the
we-
statute, but I don't know if it's in a statute that they have to pay.
That's what I'm asking. That's the part I'm asking.
Ron says no.
Okay. So, Mr.
Yeah, I
Holt,
would,
Chair Holt.
kind of hearing everything I heard this morning in this discussion, I think we should put it in the form of a motion, that the Finance Committee recommends to the full board, that staff make a presentation to all the statutory members, including Hart and also PSTA, although they're fully aware of what's going on. But I think it would be appropriate that we specifically ask all of these bodies to entertain an agenda segment for us to make a presentation that is uniform and consistent and shows the interrelationship of everyone in the community.
Will someone second that motion? Because he has a
Second.
motion on the floor. So
I would like to second with a comment if I could. Oh, I had it on. I would like to second with a comment if I could. I totally agree with you, Commissioner Holton. And, to me, this is a clarion call that we have dropped the ball on our side by not making these presentations, by not being out in front. We all know these meetings are televised, and it's an opportunity to make our mission and our objectives known. But they don't know what they don't know. And I'm happy to advocate with them about the importance of partnering. You just take that one example and think how devastating it would be if it was replicated in our other cities, St. Petersburg, or in our other counties.
Okay, so let's, because actually the motion is on the floor. We're going to go ahead and vote on that because there's a motion on the floor, but that is not the action item request that's before us. So let's go ahead and vote for the motion that's on the floor, which I don't think staff has a problem with it, but we're going to go ahead and vote on it so that it is truly a directive to staff. And then we would like to have those scheduled sooner rather than later. So we're asking David, for you to go ahead and have your team or yourself make those calls to those entities that are noted here for this interlocal agreement so we can begin to get on their calendar. I know for Pinellas County, it's like at the front of our agenda when those types of presentations are made. So you're not there all day. You're like at the front of the agenda. So we have a motion with a second. Everybody's clear. It's just simply to make those presentations. Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. The request is that TBARTA staff contact the organizations that are a part of the interlocal agreement and make actual presentations to those organizations or agencies about what it is that we do, what the funding is going for, what things we have been planning for, and hopefully answer any questions so that they'll know that the dollars that we're asking them for, they know where those dollars are going and what we're advocating for. So that's.
And will that presentation be to all members or just the ones that?
To the ones that are noted here
Ones that-
for the proposed contribution, interlocal contribution. Yes, sir.
Thank
And then there was a request that we look at Hart and PSTA as intermodal organizations. So that's what's on the table. We have a motion with a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now, the action item that we actually are voting on is the interlocal agreement, which includes the financial contributions, the proposed financial contributions from the entities so noted, which includes Tampa, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pinellas, Polk, Hernando. I think I got them all. Hernando, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pasco, Pinellas, St. Pete, and Tampa to the tune of $722,565.62. So do we have a motion with a second? Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion with a second to move forward with the proposed interlocal agreement contributions from the aforementioned counties and cities. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Do we have any that are opposed? Thank you so very much. And David, if you have any issues or problems or someone is kind of lagging about getting with you, just get to the person that's on the board and say, can you nudge your chair to get us on? And I'm sure they'll be happy to do that. Thank you so very much for the presentation. And thank you to the Finance Committee for putting all of that together. Do we have any other businesses to come before our committee? We are 6 minutes over, not too bad. No other business to come before the Finance Committee. We will adjourn the Finance Committee. Thank you all. Good discussion. All right. So I'm also going to be chairing the Policy Committee. And so we will go ahead and start the Policy Committee at 9:36. Do we have a quorum? I think we do. So we'll go ahead and call that meeting to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Catherine Starkey,
She did say that she will be absent for this meeting. She shared that.
Commissioner Renee Flowers,
Present.
Commissioner Jeff Holcomb,
Present.
Commissioner Janet Long, Jim Holton.
Present?
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have, oh gosh, we didn't pledge to the flag. Sorry. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, please forgive me for missing that part. I truly am sorry. Do we have anyone for public comment, both in the audience or online? No one for public comment? So we have our consent agenda items. The minutes were provided to us in advance. Have you all had a chance to peruse those minutes? And if so, do I have a motion with a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Long, second by Commissioner Holcomb to approve those minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Do we have any that are opposed? We have one action item to take up today, and that's the 2022 PTASP update. Ken? Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, so I'm here to ask for your approval for the 2022 updates for the Ptasp, the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan. Every year, the FTA, the Federal Transit Authority, requires public transit agencies to review, update, and certify their Ptasp. In July of 2020, the original Ptasp was approved by the board. And an update to the Ptasp in 2021 was approved in April of that year. We have 3 minor changes to the Ptasp for this year. We've updated the performance matrix table, incorporating data from 2021. We've updated the safety hotline contact information. And we've added the Centers for Disease Control and the Florida Department of Health as sources of information for public health, public safety. And this is in compliance with the bipartisan infrastructure law. The fiscal impact, so failure to certify or comply with FTA's requirements could make us, or TBARTA, ineligible to receive FTA grant funds. So it's with that we recommend an update to the Ptasp. Any questions?
Do we have any questions? Great job on low incident rates. Any questions? So this is an action item. Do we have a motion to accept the Ptasp report? PTASP. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Commissioner Holton. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed. Thank you so very much. We have a couple of information items. State legislative update, Mr. Ron Pierce. What's not going on in Tallahassee?
Very quiet in Tallahassee these days. Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. Pleasure to be before you. I'll talk about what happened during regular session as with regards to this board. Before I get to that, by the way, we're happy to help David with regards to helping setting up meetings before any of the commissions. Happy to do that. I also think it would be prudent as well to set up a meeting directly with Mayor Castor with regards to the funding for the city of Tampa, and I'll be happy to work with David on that as well. So we'll get those on the calendar. Let's talk about policy number one. Senator Brandis's bill that would have repealed the Enabling Act for TBARTA that was filed during session in Tallahassee did not move in the Senate, nor was it introduced in the House. So there was no action there, which is really good. From a funding standpoint, we were able to receive two pots of money this year for TBARTA in the budget. Number one, $375,000 in operating dollars. And then probably more importantly, $1 million in transportation disadvantage funding for TD Tampa Bay. The 375 operating in the $1 million is both of those pots are non-recurring general revenue. The reason that's really important to this board and more importantly to many of our partners is in the past, we've received trust fund dollars, transportation trust fund dollars. And as you all know, typically what happens is Secretary Gwynn and his staff is put in a position where they have to then kind of rearrange the chairs on the deck of the ship to make sure that there's only so much funding to go around, which impacts some of our transit partners, such as HART and PSTA. With this being non-recurring general revenue, they will not have to do that. So I know that's really important to this board, and more important, it was very important to our transit partners here in the Tampa Bay area. So again, it's $1 million for transportation disadvantage for TD Tampa Bay, $375,000 for operating. We do believe, by the way, that some of the $1 million will be able to be used for operating as well for the agency. So that will get us close to our full request of the $750 that we had requested. You're all thinking there, that's great, Ron. So where are we with the governor? So we believe we have made significant progress with the governor. I know that Cliff has had a conversation with the Senate president. I know this is something that's very important to the Senate president. I think he's going to work very hard with his team to make sure that the governor's office understands the importance of these dollars moving forward. In addition to the conversations that Cliff's had as chair, we've had numerous conversations with the governor's staff as well as the Senate president in the speaker's office on the importance of this as well. We have one final meeting with the governor's office early next week to talk about the importance of keeping these dollars in. The governor does not have the budget yet, but now that special session ended yesterday, we believe that the governor will probably have the budget within the next week or two, and then action will probably be taken, I would assume by the mid to the latter part of May. There is another special session that will be announced later in May as it relates to property insurance. We do not expect them to hold the budget that long. Now that special session's over, specifically with the congressional maps, we do think the budget will probably be released sooner rather than later to them. So, let me recognize, by the way, a lot of work goes in getting these dollars into the budget. So a lot of you had made phone calls. A lot of you were very involved in that process. I thank you. Caitlin Owen on my team was very involved as well. She's the one in our office that handled all of our appropriations requests. And so she was the one that making sure that we stayed on track during the budget conference process to ensure that we were able to get the 1.375 million for you. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have. And more importantly, look forward to giving this update to the full board as well.
Not a
Questions?
question, but a comment. Thank you for your hard work and thank you for keeping us informed as the process moved and letting us know if we needed to do any quick emergency reach out and whatnot. So I'm very grateful for that. And I am grateful that Senator Brandy's request didn't go anywhere. So thank you so very much. Does anyone have any other comments? And also thank you to our chair, because I know last year you worked very hard with the president of the Senate, and I know that you've been back and forth this year. So thank you so very much for your work as well.
I like seeing you in person also.
Yes, I'm happy to be in person. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Good work.
Very good. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
We
Thank
look
you.
forward to hearing that we stayed in the budget for full allocation.
Yes, ma'am. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have none other than our very own Mr. Harry Glenn talking about BIL funding opportunities.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Harry Glenn with Van Squick Associates. It's good to be with you also in person, Mr. Chairman. So it's great to be back and here. David gave me the unenviable task of in 10 minutes trying to summarize all the federal funding opportunities that are available in the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill. So I've had a couple slides here that Chris is going to help me drive. Just as a reminder, when we're talking about funding for transportation programs, there are several pots of money, and it's helpful, I think, to keep all in mind. So in November, the President Biden signed into law the IIJA, which is the infrastructure bill that provides $1.2 trillion in funding for federal transportation initiatives. $550 billion of that is new money. The rest of the money is continuation of trust funds and other funding that Congress provides every 5 years. About 75, Secretary Gwynn may have a better number than this, but about 75 to 80% of that new money will actually flow to the states on a formula. So a good chunk of that money will actually be devoted to state. Will then figure out how to allocate that money for transit, transportation, highway, bridges, and other projects. So, but the remainder of that money, the other 25%, will be awarded on a competitive basis. And so we're going to talk about some of those federal funding opportunities here. Other thing to keep in mind is after the November bill was signed into law, Congress had to finish its regular appropriations process for the federal fiscal year 22. As you know, that began October 1st. Congress didn't actually finish their regular appropriations work until March 11th when the president signed that bill into law. So we were 5.5 months late on that. I kind of joke with Ron Pierce that the state actually lapsed, I think, the federal government in getting their budget work done. But so that money, some of that money then gets added into, and we'll talk about that in a second, into the funding that's available in the infrastructure bill. So it gets a little complicated. And that's why you see a bunch of numbers up here. I wasn't really sure. I'm not the best on PowerPoints on how to convey all that information. So I want to explain that to you. The last thing to know is that because the federal budget process was late in getting done, not finished until March, there's a prohibition in the continuing resolutions that keep the government open and from prohibiting federal agencies from starting any new activities until the final budget is done. And so a lot of the new programs that were created in the bipartisan or in the infrastructure bill that were new staff couldn't even work on the notice of funding opportunities for those programs until the final appropriations work was done in March. So what you'll see here on some of these funding opportunities is some of the existing program money was started to roll out late last year and early this year. The new programs that were created in the bill will start rolling out in May. So your individual grant writers at each of your institutions, your counties, your cities are going to be very busy starting in May trying to analyze these new notice of funding opportunities. And so we'll talk about those. So on the first slide here, these are the federal funding opportunities that are already out and available. In fact, some have closed. RAISE grant is probably the largest federal funding opportunity out there. It used to be called the Tiger Grant Program, then it was called the Build Grant Program, now it's called the RAISE Grant Program. These are for projects of regional significance. And as you will see, Congress traditionally has been funding this program at $1 billion a year. In fiscal 22, the Congress provided $1 billion a year, and the infrastructure bill provided another $2.5 billion for this program. So if you look at a program like this, there'll be $3.5 billion available for RAISE grant projects this year versus $1 billion historically in the past. So significant new funding opportunities. That grant application window just closed last week, so that process is underway. Other programs that, and we'll talk specifically to David's point, which programs are really the ones that TBARTA is most interested in. And someday you will be interested in the Bus and Bus Facilities Grant Program. This is an annual funding program that the Federal Transit Administration provides to support facilities and infrastructure and including buying buses for transit agencies. That grant opportunity is now open, and it's been combined with the low and no emission bus program, which is a $1.1 billion program, which is up from in the neighborhood of $50 million annually that used to provide for that program. Now there's more than $1 billion this year for that. So that was a joint funding opportunity that became available. I think that window closes later in May. There's another multiple funding opportunity called the Multimodal Project Discretionary Grant Program that actually combines 3 existing federal programs into one funding opportunity. The largest portion of that, $2.9 billion, is for mega projects. These are of state, regional and state significance. These are bigger projects than even the RAISE grant. These are in the hundreds of millions of dollar projects. Think of things like the tunnels for the Amtrak trains that go into New York City. Those kind of projects that are, multi-year and in the mega hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's one funding opportunity that was in there. The second is the Infra Grant Program, which is mainly freight focused, more efficiently moving freight throughout regions and states. And then finally, there's a rural funding initiative there that's open. So those are all currently the existing funding opportunities that are out. On the next slide, Chris. Next coming up will be some funding opportunities that I think will be more of interest to, I know all of you have transportation interests in your other hats that you wear at your councils and commissions. So coming up in May will be a new program that Congress created it's called the Electric or Low Emitting Ferry Program. This is in addition to the regular federal ferry grant program. It's a program focused at kind of like the low and no emission bus program. This will be low and no emission ferry grant program. So first time, there'll be $50 million available for communities to apply for these new ferry boats. There'll also be an opening for the ferry and ferry terminal competitive grant program. I know the county, I believe Hart received the funding for this to receive funding for a new boat last year. So the Congress provided $112 million for that in the regular appropriations bill, plus another $68 million in the infrastructure bill. So there'll be a large pot of $180 million for that program this year as compared to past years where it was about in the $30 to $40 million range. So that's another opportunity. We did learn when Commissioner Flowers and Commissioner Long were up in town in Washington a couple of weeks ago, we did learn there was actually a defect in the infrastructure bill. There's also a new program that doesn't really help this area, but there's a rural ferry boat program that's funded at $200 million a year in the infrastructure bill. There was supposed to be parity between the rural program and the non-rural program at $200 million each. And somehow in the legislation, it only provided $68 million a year for the non-rural ferry boat program. So Congress is looking at that, trying to correct that. If they can correct that this year, it would provide additional funding for areas like the Tampa Bay area where they have significant needs for ferry boats. One of the more important, I think, grant opportunities, not necessarily for TBARTA, but for you all as public officials, is a new program too coming out in May. It's called the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. This is a program that will be focused on improving vehicular safety, but also passenger and bike safety, so that to try and reduce the incidence of injuries and death in road hazards and road problems. They're looking to particularly in underserved areas, so areas where people don't have sidewalks or don't have safe passage to get to bus routes or to get to other transportation sources. So that's an important program. It'll be funded at $1 billion this year, so that's a brand new program. And finally, two last programs. As Secretary Gwynn knows, the president, one of the first things the president rolled out after he signed the bill was a bridge program where funding would go to the states on a formula basis. Unfortunately, Florida does poorly in that because they've done a really good job of maintaining their bridges. So they get penalized for being good at maintaining their bridges. States with bridges that are in more of disrepair get a higher proportion of the money. But there will be funding goes to the state for a bridge program, but there will also be for the bringing back after a 5-year hiatus, a new bridge investment grant program that'll be funded at about $2.4 billion this year between the appropriation and the infrastructure funding. And this is for communities to apply for bridge needs. So each of the communities can look at bridges that they have a need for and compete directly for that, separate from the state allocation of money. And finally, there's a $50 million program that I'm not sure when, we haven't seen when the notice of funding opportunity will come out. We expect it sometime in May or June. It's called the Congestion Relief Program, which would be of interest, I think, to an urban area like this. The idea is to eliminate negative impacts from congestion, improving safety, mobility, climate, quality of life. It kind of goes to improving emissions and other problems in underserved areas. So it's something else for counties and communities here to look at. And then, Chris, on the next slide, I think you got up there. Some of the notice of funding opportunities that will come out later this year that communities here may be interested in are the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program. This was an initiative by President Biden to take a look at roadways and other transportation infrastructure that cut communities in half. There were major interstate highways that went through, he talks about Syracuse, New York, that went through Syracuse. There was another one in New Orleans that went right through the middle of the city and just basically split the city in half. And so he asked for $5 billion for this program. Congress funded it at a much lower amount, $1 billion, which is distributed out over 5 years. But that's for the first time that program will come out, the notice of funding opportunity in June. There'll also be funding this summer coming out for, going back to Commissioner Gwynn or Secretary Gwynn, there's monies going from the federal government to the states for charging infrastructure. They'll get money based on a formula to improve infrastructure for electric vehicles throughout the state. But there will be a separate program this year at $400 million for the Charging and Infrastructure Grant Program that will allow communities to apply for charging infrastructure and primarily to put it in public facilities where vehicles can come in and charge up at city halls, libraries, and other public facilities. So that'll be a competitive opportunity coming out sometime this summer. And then finally, two last programs. There's a new program called the Protect Competitive Grant Program. And what this is a program to help communities make their transportation infrastructure more resilient, particularly helpful, I think, to Florida, where you're incurring sea level rise, hurricanes, and other problems that could impact your transportation, your bus facilities, your bus terminals, your highways, and your bridges. So there'll be a program there that communities can apply. Some of the money will go to the state on a formula. Other money will be able to be competed for directly by communities. And there, within that program, there's $250 million set aside for communities to particularly harden their infrastructure against weather events like hurricanes. So something for Florida to look at. There's a second program to reduce carbon emissions from vehicular traffic. That's a $1.3 billion program. And then there's a program that's more directed at ports to eliminate emissions in ports to try and electrify more of the vehicles that are used at ports around the country. And then finally, talk about some of the ongoing programs here, Chris, on the next slide. Some of the ongoing programs that were included in both the infrastructure bill and the regular appropriations bill. And these are programs that more immediately, I think, impact TBARTA. The first is the FTA Formula Grant Program. This is the program that comes from trust fund dollars and some general revenue goes out to regions based on a formula. It's a very complicated formula. And I see my friend Debbie Leos is here today. She can actually talk more to this. But what happens is regions within the country will receive an allocation from the Federal Transit Administration. And then within the region, the partners within the region, in this case, I believe, Debbie, it's PSTA, HART, TBARTA, and Pasco County, work on what's called an urbanized area formula grant. And so money comes into that group of entities, and then the entities themselves have to agree to a memorandum of agreement between the four on how that money will be distributed among the four groups. And so what's significant, though, is last year, the Formula Grant Program was funded by Congress at $10 billion. Between the infrastructure bill and the appropriation this year, the formula goes up to $13.4 billion. So it's a $4 billion increase, which raises all the additional money, raises all the boats, I guess, as they would say. And so that'll be an additional $4 billion that'll be spread out across the country on a formula basis. So that should be good news for TBARTA, should generate additional dollars out of that request. And I think Debbie, in a meeting we had the other day with PSTA, was saying that she's working on with the other partners on the letter of how to divvy up that money. So that's good news. And then further good news is in the president's budget request for fiscal year 23, he asked for another $300 million on top of that for the Formula Grant Program in fiscal 23, which would be another significant boost, I think, to transit agencies around the country. The second ongoing program that I think is probably most important to TBARTA is the Capital Investment Grant Program. This is the Seminal program at the Federal Transit Administration that supports building of infrastructure. It's the program under which PSTA funded the Sunrunner program as a small start. I know that the HART and the county are working on a streetcar initiative there in project development on that. So this is the program where you would build your regional rapid transit project if once design is complete. And it's a competitive program, but it's not competitive to the point where there are winners and losers. It's competitive that you get in the project development and work with FTA to try and get the program all the way through development to approval for funding. And it's significant this year in that in fiscal 21, the program was funded at $2 billion. In fiscal 22, the regular formula funding for the program was $2 billion, plus the infrastructure bill added another $1.6 billion to the program, almost doubling it to $3.6 billion. And that will occur. Point I should have made at the beginning of this presentation, you have to keep in mind that the infrastructure money we're looking at here is spread out over 5 years. So a lot of these funding opportunities we're talking about this year, all the lists that I had up there, those will be funding opportunities each year for the next 4 years after this. So even if communities don't apply or aren't successful in year one, they still have 4 more cycles to go. And in the Capital Investment Grant Program, this large infusion of additional funding will be available over the next 4 years after this year too. And so the faster that TBARTA can get into project development with the Federal Transit Administration. If you decide to move forward with the Regional Rapid Transit Program, there will be significant funding available for those programs. So last thing is, I know we're running out of time, there are a couple new programs. In addition to the infrastructure bill and the regular appropriations bill, at the end of March, the president released his fiscal year 23 budget request. We talked about some of the things he's looking for doing there, which would be helpful to transit. He also is requesting funding from Congress to create 3 new programs that would be of interest, I think, to transit agencies. One is a $50 million zero emission system planning grant program, which is for transit agencies to work with the Federal Transit Administration to plan how they can convert their vehicle fleets to electric or other non-fossil fuel fleets. So that it allows a transit agency to figure out how to create a long-term plan to convert all their buses. So $50 million competitive opportunity for everybody to look at that. The second is a new $100 million program to create climate resilience and adaptation programs for individual transit agencies. Again, trying to figure out how to use your transit assets to reduce climate impacts and to move more riders quickly. And then finally, there's a $50 million new program he proposes, which would, I think, also be of interest to this area, to integrate smart mobility into your transit systems, to use first mile, last mile service and other innovative ideas to get more riders to your bus lines. So those are 3 new programs that the president's proposing that I think would be of interest potentially to TBARTA, but to other transit agencies. Finally, the president does propose one last program called the Thriving Communities Program. This is a $111 million program he's proposing to, again, I think this would be very helpful to Tampa Bay area communities, provide better transit for disadvantaged communities, make it more climate friendly and get more people from where they live to where they have to work. And so it's to figure out what are the barriers to people getting from underserved populations to get from where they live to school, to work, to medical appointments and other things. So I think the community here has been very forward thinking in some of these things. And so there'd be a program, if Congress approves it, to provide those additional resources. I know we're probably out of time. There are other programs we didn't talk about here related to rail. We're not really focused on rail. There's $7 billion available this year for regional rail and passenger rail initiatives, which I think Brightline and some of the other providers are looking at using some of that to try and get the Brightline from the Orlando airport through Orlando and eventually over here. And another $7 billion is in the pipeline for that next year. So there's large funding sources available for rail also. So, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer. I'm sorry, there was a lot of information in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you don't have time today, I'm happy to answer any other questions individually, if that would be helpful.
I just have one question with the Protect program. You stated that the state will be eligible or some dollars will be going to the state, but then entities like TBARTA and others could apply directly.
Sorry, which program?
Protect, the Protect
Yeah,
competitive
that's correct,
grant.
Yeah.
So,
And we'll know more. That's one of the new programs that the notice of funding opportunity isn't out yet. So a lot of the information will be included in the funding notice when it comes out. So we'll know more about
okay,
what they're trying
because I was
to do.
wondering if we could apply as a singular entity as well as apply for whatever it is that the state may have.
My understanding is yes.
Yeah, okay. Does anyone have any other questions about the
I think the good
information?
news, Madam Chair, is there's a lot of money on the table over the next 5 years. And an area like this is transportation challenged. There's a lot of good opportunities. I saw Hillsborough County commissioned its own study to kind of review the IIJA to see what funding was out there, and came up with an estimate on what you thought would be coming to the county as a result of that. So it was
Commissioner Ober?
Yeah, this past Wednesday, I asked the staff to actually come back and do a preliminary analysis because a lot of this is not there. But primarily to make the case that to identify that which is a direct grant that's has to go through the state in terms of the revolving funds, but also to identify what grants are competitive grants that require a match so that we can estimate, basically how important it is for us to get this surtax passed in November. Because without that, the next shot for Hillsborough County would be in 2024. And given that these are revolving funds that actually, there may not be much left by 2025. So I thought it would be really important for our board to do a concerted effort on identifying those grant resources, what programs and missions we have in place, and then how do we go about reviving, or how do we go about acquiring the grant writing team to coordinate that? So as it pertains to TBARTA, how is TBARTA going to manage the grant identification, application process with this board for either coordinating with the regional partners on an effort. So for example, the passenger rail project that we may be identifying, or finding opportunities that TBARTA would only have as a function of TBARTA to approach those grants. And that was something I would like to find out how we plan on managing that process, because it's not simple, as you have discovered. So.
And two important points you make there. One, I know David likes to emphasize this. All the funding that we're talking about here is all for infrastructure facilities. It's not for operation of systems. So the funding does not underwrite the operations of HART or PST or others. That this is strictly for the infrastructure part of it. Second part, you make a good point too. Matches are required for most of these programs. They differ from program to program. Typically, they're 80% federal and 20% non-federal. But in the case of the Sunrunner project that PSTA competed for, I think at the end of the day, they came in at, Debbie, I think it was a 60% federal and 40% non-federal. So it's not necessarily even 80-20. And so any of the projects, particularly if you're talking about a large project and you're going to need a match, you're going to need to come up with a local match to the federal funds. So it was a good point you made, Commissioner.
All right, so those were informational items. Thank you so much. You gave us a lot to consider, and I know that you will keep us apprised as things move forward. Is there any other business to come before this committee? We're running about 7 minutes behind. All right, if there's no other business to come before this committee, we'll adjourn our policy committee. Thank you, Commissioner Kemp, for joining us. So now we will go right on in and our chair will take over.
So the chair would like to know if y'all want a quick break before we go into the board meeting. Does anybody need to break for a few minutes, or would y'all like to just move right ahead? Move ahead. So I'll call the regular board meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Cliff Manuel Jr.,
Present.
Commissioner Jeff Holcomb,
Present.
Commissioner Pat Kemp,
Here.
Commissioner Reggie Bellamy, Commissioner Catherine Starkey, Commissioner Renee Flowers,
Present.
Mayor Ken Welch,
Alternate Councilmember Deborah Fix.
Mayor Jane Castor, Commissioner Kimberly Overman,
Here,
Commissioner Janet Long,
she'll be right back.
Jim Holton,
Here.
Secretary David Gwynn,
Present.
Secretary LK Nandam.
Yes, this is Nicole Mills, present for LK Nandam.
I think we do have a quorum, or we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Since you're already warmed up on the pledge, lead us also.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So the chair would like to recognize if there's any public comment this morning.
We received no public comment.
No public comment.
No, sir.
So for the record, there is no public comment this morning. So I'll move right into the committee reports, starting off with CAC. Mr. Roberts. How are you doing this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, members of the board, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. I'm Bill Roberts. I chair your Citizens Advisory Committee, a very active group. We held our regular meeting on April the 6th. We had a quorum present. I'm happy to report. We did have no public comment, but there was a public letter submitted, which was attached to our minutes. I believe it's been provided to you. The committee voted to allow virtual participation, as is now permitted. Our newest member, Brandy Miklas, representing the city of Tampa, gave an excellent presentation on the expansion of the Riverwalk project and what is generally termed the West River project. If you haven't had a chance to review that project, I certainly encourage you to do it. It's going to be a great asset to our area. The staff gave a planning status update for various studies that TBARTA is undertaking, which we found interesting. We had an RRT concepts report that was shown to this board. at your previous meeting. And this was a chance to catch the CAC members up as to what that RIT status looked like. We had a commuter services report, and I'm just really thrilled about this program. They reported that they've got about 165 vans running. This is tremendous progress. I remember it was not that long ago, we were striving for 100 vans. So this is a real asset to our region. There were no action items for the Citizens Advisory Committee. We have 4 vacancies, which I know is an item on your agenda today, and hopefully we'll be able to fill some of those. And I would like to thank Ron Pierce and his team. They've been very gracious with their time in providing the CAC with updates on the legislative process. So we hope that ends well. So your Citizens Advisory Committee is standing by and ready to support this board in any way. I'd be happy to take any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions this morning for the CAC? Board members? Very good report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Transit Management Committee report, please. Mr. Robertson.
Good morning. Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
A little louder, be better.
Okay, how about now?
A little better. Still a little
Okay.
low.
All right, give me a second. We'll try that. Good morning, Mr. Chair and fellow board members. I'm Jonathan Roberson, the Planning Manager and Interim Operations Chief at Manatee County Area Transit and the Chair of the Transit Management Committee. We had a good meeting on April 5th, fully attended by the representatives of the 5 transit agencies represented on this board as well. We had no action items, but a number of good topics discussed, which I'll get into a little bit here. We had one comment in writing from the public regarding renewing the focus and paying attention to types of rail and expanding rail on the CSX corridors on this upcoming CSX corridor study that TBARTA is leading. We had about 3 kind of key discussion items. And in this committee, what I've tried to do since starting to chair the committee earlier this year is try to get the agencies and TBARTA staff talking about the set of regional needs, both service and capital needs at the 5 agencies, and make sure that's incorporated as well into the TBARTA plans, which I think it is. So in this last meeting, we had presentations from the bus, Janina Elkin, Hernando County, on this agency's top unfunded service and capital needs for the next 5 years. And we also heard from Heather Sobush from the committee from PSTA discussing their service and capital needs. As you can imagine, we've in previous meetings, I presented Manatee County's needs as well, and then we expect to have the needs from the other counties, Pasco and Hillsborough, presented. But our goal here in this committee is to maintain communication with the board on any important items. But this is a product we hope you see soon on. So you always have really a hot sheet or a cheat sheet on the top service and capital needs of the agencies as they are today. And we thought in this committee, this was a way for you to know at least the immediate needs as you all plan future needs in the region, which is just as important. So that is something you'll see probably coming from the committee and incorporated into TBARTA's regional TDP efforts, we hope. Second item that we had presentation was presentations from District 7 and District 1 staff on upcoming Fdot programs and funding, grant funding becoming available. So we had a presentation from Chris Leffert from District 7 and Michelle Peranto from District 1, really much appreciated, and basically focused on their annual discretionary grant programs for service, new service development, and other programs like Park and Ride were discussed. So out of that came a lot of good discussion among the 5 transit agency members on possibly what they're going to apply for for upcoming service grants and so on. So I hope that's summarized well for you in the minutes. And what you see is that there's just, I keep saying it, but there's always immediate needs that the transit agencies have. And the real trick is finding the local match for new service. And so we'll see how that goes. And a lot of this funding is all dependent on what's passed in the budget and what will be in the new FDOT budget starting July 1. And these would be for grant funds that would start July 1, 2023. Other business, there was a big discussion I found very important about the Transit Management Committee in general. There's some suggestions that maybe with all the expertise on the Transit Management Committee with leadership and planning, is there more efforts we could be doing as a committee that help the board, in particular, reaching out or in any involvement with economic development organizations like Tampa Bay Partnership or the EDC? And also, should we be looking more at efforts in consolidating affordable housing efforts with our transit investments and resources? So it was kind of a question the committee and myself wanted to put to you for some time or something to think about. And again, I think you have a lot of talent on this committee, Adelie, and you have leadership, really higher leadership from a lot of the transit agencies. We're here to help and would love any suggestions on anything else we could be doing to help you. But that's really all I had. I just wanted to know if there's any questions.
Thank you. Any questions this morning, board members? All good. Thank you. Excellent report.
Thank you.
So I'm going to recognize Commissioner Flowers for both the policy and the finance committee reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly wanted to go over what we discussed this morning. We had a presentation from our finance department. We are in a healthy financial position. I'm grateful for that. We have a surplus, actual surplus for the month of March. It's $392,334. So we are thankful for being placed in that position. We also discussed the resolution of finding a home. So that lease for 1 Eisenhower Plaza has been completed. We get a couple of treats out of that, a little free rent. 3 months of free rent. And then we also won't have to pay a deposit. And I think that the dollar value that we've been able to ascertain for the amount per square foot certainly is to be commendable from Ms. Gowan and staff for coordinating that lease. So it looks like everybody will be able to move in, putting in workstations and things of that nature, and we'll be set there. So we supported that wholeheartedly from our committee. We also talked about the interlocal agreement, which you came in at the tail end of that and made the decision to go ahead and pass the proposed dollar amounts that were presented before us for this committee. So we had a pretty good, quick, short meeting.
And follow-up presentations.
Follow-up presentations to all of those contributors, and also included HART and PSTA in those. They were not listed, but they wanted those included.
You want to move straight into policy?
Straight into policy. So our policy committee meeting and our chair, the chair of the policy committee meeting of the chair of the policy committee did state she would not be able to attend today. So I'm grateful that I was able to supplant. Our action item was an update from our PTASP plan program, and that's really for the safety for transportation, and we accepted that entire update. A copy of that has been provided to everybody. So if you need to peruse that or share that with your colleagues, please feel free to do so. And then we just had our very informative updates, both from state level with Mr. Ron Pierce and his team member that's here from Ron Pierce RSA, and of course, BIL funding opportunities from Harry Glenn from Van Scovic. So those were just informational items to keep us informed.
And would you like to recognize them for the board for a follow-up presentation under your committee?
Yes, definitely. Mr. Ron Pierce will be coming back before us if anything happens. We are hopeful that there won't be a red veto pen on any of our items. We're hopeful that that $1 million+ will hold. And then as it relates to Mr. Harry Glenn, certainly coming back, letting us know what's going on, what's been passed, some of the nuances that we talked about here today, for those grants that will require matches, and those things that we can apply for unilaterally, both on a local level and from the state.
I think it'd be appropriate at this time to recognize Ron for a brief report to the board, just outlining what you provided to the Finance Committee. As summary for you, Harry, as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'll be brief. I know most of you have heard this. Three things. Number one, Senator Brandis' bill that was going to repeal the Enabling Act for TBARTA did not move in the Senate, nor was it introduced in the House. So that's good news. As Commissioner Flowers pointed out, we did receive $1.375 million in the budget in two separate buckets. Number one, $375,000 for operations and $1 million for TD Tampa Bay Transportation Disadvantage Programming for the region. What's important about that, and I know Commissioner Kemp will appreciate this because it's something we've talked a lot about, is all of those dollars are non-recurring general revenue. It is not transportation trust fund dollars, so it will not impact any of our transit partners in any way, which is really, really good news. So hopefully we've been working with the governor's office. As we talked about earlier, Cliff, as our chairs, reached out to Senate President Wilton Simpson, and we've talked to the governor's office multiple times. We expect the governor to get the budget probably within the next week or two and probably have action with it by our next board meeting. So hopefully we'll come back to our next board meeting with some good news.
Thank you. Harry, Cliff notes. Sorry, high-level version.
Cliff notes. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Money's coming.
I don't know.
They're gonna vote on
Chris,
it.
Chris wants to run the slides real quick. I could just, Mr. Chairman, what we talked about, the policy committee was just talking about where we are with funding for the infrastructure programs. Been a lot of discussion in the last year about that. President Biden signed the infrastructure bill into law in November. Congress finally finished up its regular appropriations process in March. All those funds will now be combined in the federal funding opportunities for governments and transit agencies around the country. And we did talk through a couple slides. There are several funding opportunities that are, let me go back. I'm sorry, one thing I forgot to say at the beginning of the last presentation. This is the infrastructure bill is a 5-year bill. So the funding opportunities we talk about here, this is the first competition of what will be 5 competitions. So each year for the next 5 years, we expect funding about at the same level for these programs. So currently the Federal Transit Administration and Department of Transportation have grant opportunities, application opportunities out for the RAISE grant, which is the largest grant opportunity currently pending. It's for projects of regional transportation significance. They combine 2 funding opportunities, the bus and bus facility grant and low and no emission bus grant program. So someday that'll be a program that TBARTA will be able to apply for to maintain its facilities. And then there's a new combination program called the Multimodal Projects Discretionary Grant Program, which loops together a program for moving freight more efficiently for mega projects of multi-millions of dollars, larger than the RAISE grant, and then a rural transit program. Next slide, Chris. Then May is going to be a particularly busy month. Some of the new programs that were created in the infrastructure bill will roll out. There'll be a program for electric or low emitting ferry grants, a first-time program to provide $50 million for that. There will be a competition for a ferry and ferry terminal competitive grant program. You know, the area is interested, several communities are interested in that. Expands the program to about $180 million from what was currently about a $30 to $50 million program a year. So almost more than three times the amount of funding will be available. There's a program that'll be a significant interest to the electeds here, Safe Streets and Roads for All, which will improve pedestrian and vehicular safety in community roadways, improve sidewalks, crosswalks, signalization, just to basically try and protect pedestrians and bikers. And then there's a new competitive bridge discretionary grant program that'll be available to communities to apply to fix the bridges. One thing I didn't say at the beginning, I mentioned Secretary Gwyn's, our expert on this, is about 3/4 to 80% of the money in the new infrastructure bill actually flows to the states on a formula. So the lion's share of the money will actually go to the states, and you'll work with the states on trying to secure some of that money. And things like there's a bridge program that goes to the states on the formula, and then there's a competitive program that local communities can apply for. And finally, there's a new program that will probably roll out in June for $50 million to eliminate congestion within communities, particularly in urban areas like the greater Tampa Bay area. Next slide, Chris. And then coming up later this year, will be a pilot program for reconnecting communities. We talked about that. This is significant projects where roadways or transit infrastructure kind of cut through communities, try and link those communities back together. There'll be $400 million for communities. Again, a larger share of the money will go to the states on a formula, but there'll be $400 million available to communities to apply for charging and infrastructure grants in public facilities. There's a new program that we talked about. Commissioner Flowers asked some good questions about the Protect Competitive Grant Program, which is to improve transit resiliency of your highway, your transit infrastructure within communities. That's a $250 million program, particularly important to a community like areas like the Tampa Bay area, which are impacted by sea level rise and other natural disasters, storms, hurricanes. And then there's another program, a new program for $50 million, which also is significant for this area to enhance the mobility for seniors and the disabled. And that may be a program that your transportation disadvantage program might take a look at too. We'll send that when it comes out. And finally, last slide is, Chris, thank you. Two ongoing programs are probably right now the most significant for TBARTA. One is the FTA Formula Grant Program. This is the program that funds are distributed by the Federal Transit Administration to urban areas to support their transit providers. In this case, the urbanized area formula grant comes to the Tampa Bay area, and it's split between TBARTA, PSTA, HART, and Pasco County. And so the four partners will get together and sign a memorandum of agreement to distribute those funds that come from the FTA. What's significant this year is that there's more than $3 billion in additional funds to the formula grant that'll go out across the country. So that means there'll be more funds coming to the greater Tampa Bay area. So that's good for TBARTA. That should increase the annual amount you get through formula. And then the second program that would be a future interest to TBARTA is the Capital Investment Grant Program. This is the Seminal program at the Federal Transit Administration that allows the federal government to invest and support transit agencies as they expand transit infrastructure. Examples, the PSTA's Sunrunner program. It was actually funded through this program as a small start several years ago. What's significant this year is that the program last year was funded at $2 billion. This year, between the regular appropriation and the infrastructure funding, there'll be $3.6 billion available for this program. So a significant increase in investment. This is the program where you would conceivably apply for funding for the Regional Rapid Transit Project. Commissioner Overman made a good point in our earlier conversation that these programs mostly do require a match. In most cases, it's at least a 20% local match for these federal competitive grant programs. Some cases, the match is a little higher. I know on the Sunrunner project, I believe it was a 40% local match for that project. So sometimes the match is higher than 20%. And so that would be a challenge, I think, to TBARTA. You have to accrue the match for that. Last thing is just to make a point that David and I talk about all the time. All the programs we talk about here are to help with infrastructure. These programs and funding opportunities are not to support the operations of transit agencies. So the fare box and other revenues that the communities generate pay for that. These are only for the infrastructure side. And finally, the president's budget, he submitted to Congress at the end of February, did call for creating a couple new programs that might be of interest to TBARTA and you as elected officials. One is a new $50 million program to reduce emissions, help transit agencies plan to reduce emissions in their vehicle fleets, to help create a plan to transition their buses and their other vehicles from diesel or gas power to electric or other renewable energy. Second program is a $100 million program, which would be particularly of interest to this area, to create more climate resiliency and adaptation for transit agencies. So this is to make sure that your infrastructure is protected against sea level rise and storms. So that would be particularly interest here. And third, there's a new $50 million program to create better integration of smart mobility between transit agencies and other transit providers. So first mile, last mile service and other ways to get people, intermodal operations to get people to your main bus lines. And then finally, there's a $111 million program the president proposes to create a new, something called the Thriving Communities Program, which would really be focused on serving underserved parts of the community to make sure that there are transit options to them for those residents to get them from where they live to where they work and where they go to school and when they need to go to the medical appointments. So again, another important program for this area. So, Mr. Chairman, that was my Cliff Notes version. I'm sorry it was but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We have a slightly different audience with the board now than we have in committee meetings, so. Question? Chair recognizes Commissioner Holcomb.
Statement and a question, I guess. You just showed us like 20 or 30 different grant categories. Don't you think it'd be a lot more efficient if they just said, Florida, here's your transportation dollars from the federal government. These are the things it can be used for. And these smart transportation people apply for it. But that's just my statement. My question is.
Sir, they did, I mean, that's to my point earlier, that most of the money does go out to the state's own formula. So a good part of that money will go to the state, and then the State Department of Transportation will decide how much, what they want to spend on highways and safe streets and the other transit options. So a large part of that, but they did want to retain some opportunity for communities to apply for things.
There's politics in it. I
Yeah,
get it.
no, I understand.
But on that note, we applied for a raised grant. And I know, and maybe I'm confusing two things, but you also said that for one of the grants, there was a formula and then part of it was for competition. Is that the raised grant?
No, the
or is
raise
that a
grant is
different
strictly
one?
competitive. So that's the program that went from $1 billion last year to $3.5 billion this year. So it'll
Okay.
be a significant larger. Last year, just in context, there were 90 raise grant award winners. I think there were 3 in Florida, 2 in the Tampa Bay area, out of 900 applications. So with more than doubling the funding, there should be significantly additional projects funded this year.
Chair recognizes
Okay,
Commissioner
thank you.
Overman.
Great, thank
Is
you.
your light on?
Yes, I
Okay,
believe it is.
great,
Yes.
thank you.
Actually, it's a question for Secretary Quinn, I believe. The electric car, electric charging station plan. When I was in DC, they talked about how the states actually had to submit a plan and then the local communities could wrap around it was their recommendation for the charging stations. Where is the state of Florida when it comes to submitting the plan for Florida for the state portion of the electric car charging station?
So our central office staff are preparing, in the process of preparing a strategy for how to employ the electric vehicle charging stations. One of the challenges we had is a lot of the places that would seem more logical to put them, like for instance, on rest areas on the interstate, for instance, we can't because of laws prohibiting private, same reason we can't put a gas station or a restaurant out at our rest areas. So we're probably going to be looking to work with partners as well as perhaps even with private partners to look for opportunities to be able to put the charging stations in locations where they actually would be beneficial and would be used. So that's still in the early stages of developing the plan, but once we get a better handle on the strategy, we'll be able to come out to local agencies and TPO, MPOs to tell them what our strategy is.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, the reason you can't put it in rest stations is because you cannot charge at rest stations, correct? I mean, charge for the charging station, not charge.
It's the same.
You can't pay, you can't have someone pay for the electric charging at a rest station. Is that correct?
Well, it goes back to like on the turnpike, for instance, we have rest service stations, areas where you can get gas, you can get food and all that because there's no federal money on the turnpike system. Because years ago, they didn't want to be competing with the businesses at the interchanges and so forth. That wasn't allowed. I think the only thing they allow is some vending machines and so forth. And so, yeah, it falls underneath that prohibition.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Commissioner, just to add Commissioner Holcomb's comment, so a good portion of money is going to the state's own formula for the charging, but then there will be a $400 million competitive program for communities to apply for charging infrastructure. So you, as Hillsborough County, could apply for additional funding separate from the state money to set up charging infrastructure within your community.
Yeah, I'm looking to try and add that to our affordable housing sort of bonus point situation so that communities that are looking to be either in transit emphasis corridors or affordable housing to be able to access electric charging within those communities, because there will be a need for it, and it's certainly a lower cost alternative to using gas fuels. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I'm going to move into action items. Thank you, Harry. First action item is the approval of our March board minutes.
Move approval.
Have a motion and a second for approval. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Chair would like to recognize David Green, MPO appointments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we had a couple vacancies on our CAC that the Hernando Citrus MPO has made appointments for. Carlene Reese was named primary. She's been a planner in Hernando County since 1990 and has worked as a transportation planner with Hernando Citrus MPO since 2017. In that role, she's been involved with all the MPO core programs, transportation disadvantaged local coordinating boards, the MPO committees, and project management. Bob Esposito has been named alternate. Bob obviously is no stranger to TBARTA. He's currently the Hernando Citrus MPO Executive Director, and prior to that worked for 9 years as the Government Affairs Liaison for Fdot District 7. And so we are asking the board today to affirm those two appointments to the CAC.
Okay, I'll make that
Commissioner
motion
Holcomb.
from Fernando.
I'll second. Oh, sorry.
I have a motion and a second. I think Commissioner Flowers was just under the wire. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, David. So we'll move.
Quick question.
Yes, Commissioner. Overton.
As it relates to appointments and positions, have we reached out to the city of Tampa to determine timeline for replacement of our current board member our past board member that's no longer eligible to serve?
They're in process of identifying somebody.
Okay.
They haven't given us a timeline, but they have to identify the person. Has to go to the city council for approval,
Okay.
and then they'll notify us who that person is.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
I did ask that question.
Next action item also recognizes David Green for our office lease.
Yes, this is an item that moved forward from the Finance Committee. Jennifer Cowan and I completed negotiations with the landlord, and what's in your packet this morning are the final terms and conditions that we reached. The lease is for 64 months, which is for a term of 5 years plus 4 additional months of free rent. The base rent starts at $26.50 a square foot and totals $281,687 for the full term. Additional rent then is also charged as a proportional share of any annual increase in their operating expenses and property taxes. TBARTA does have the right to terminate for loss of funding, but would have to reimburse the landlord for all unamortized improvements, free rent, and commission that they paid. No security deposit is required, and our federal funds can be used to cover the cost of the lease payments. This final draft addresses all the issues that Jennifer and I identified during the review process, and our recommendation is to approve the lease agreement with Tampa Eisenhower LLC.
Commissioner Flowers, do you want to add anything that from the Finance Committee
N-
discussions or
Other than we approved, it was unanimous. within the
recommendation
Finance
for
Committee.
approval?
Yes.
Yep. So board members, I think that's fairly clear. Any questions for David on the office lease? I have a motion for approval
Second.
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, David. So the chair will recognize Jennifer Cohen for our interlocal agreement.
Good morning. As with the last item, this item went before the Finance Committee and was recommended for approval. Before you is the interlocal agreement for financial contributions provided from 5 counties and the 2 cities, set to begin in the fiscal year 2023 and on each October thereafter. Each contributor will contribute an amount equal to 17 cents per capita on the population of that contributor, according to the most recent population estimates. TBARTA will invoice the contributor for that payment. Each contributor is limited, or obligation is limited to the amounts that are appropriated and can pay from legally available funds. With regard to TBARTA and the contributors, they're each responsible for their respective employees' actions and are limited in liability to the extent provided by Florida statute and the waiver of sovereign immunity. Any contributor can withdraw from the agreement by notifying the other parties within 30 days, and the agreement will become effective upon filing with the 5 clerks of the circuit courts for the 5 counties. There are other standard provisions, which are what you would generally find in your contract, such as the governing law, relationship between the parties, compliance, or counterparts, authority, and dispute resolution provisions that provide any dispute will go before the dispute resolution process outlined in Chapter 164 of the Florida statutes. this interlocal agreement has been circulated to all of the 7 entities legal counsel, and any revisions or comments that they have been incorporated.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any questions? Commissioner Kemp, you're recognized.
Have all the entities agree? I understand one of the cities has not agreed to participate.
All of the entities responded back with regard to the legality of the revisions, but I think what you're referencing is a conversation that Mr. Green had with the city of Tampa, their mayor. Go ahead.
Yes, we received notice from the city of Tampa that they were unable to contribute financially to TBARTA.
So how does that work in terms of what you were saying, that invoicing and?
So the agreement hasn't been presented to any of the boards of those entities at this point. It was just being brought forth to this board to ensure that you all were comfortable with the terms and willing to move it forward. At the Finance Committee, there was a motion that was made and passed to have Mr. Green provide a presentation to each one of the entities, talking about kind of where TBARTA has been and where it's going, and how this interlocal agreement is very valuable to TBARTA as an entity.
And also, can you, how much does this increase the contribution that Hillsborough County makes?
It was in the, I'll pull up my report real quick. It was a part of the report that we had for our committee. So for, and I know we talked about these dollar amounts previously, trying to come up with the best way possible to be as fair as possible. So it's about 17 cents per capita. So for Tampa, their current is $0, but their proposed would be $69,291.83. Hernando is $33,067.55. Hillsborough is $248,159.54. Manatee would be $67,950.70. Pasco would be $95,521.47. Pinellas would be $163,048.19. St. Petersburg would be $45,526.34.
So how much does it increase from the current amount to the?
$0.
No, it doesn't. It increases for
about-
Hillsborough County, what we pay now.
I'm sorry.
To what the,
I'm sorry, I thought you meant Tampa. I thought you were saying Tampa. So Hillsborough went from $222,812.19.
222,000 currently?
$812.19. And it went to the proposed amount. I'm not going to say went to, the proposed amount is $248,159.54. So give or take $25,000 increase.
And when you do the per capita, does that include when you're doing per capita for Hillsborough or Pinellas County? Is it for the cities of Tampa included in it, and then a second charge per capita for the cities?
Yes, so the way that it was calculated was based on the population of the county, and then each city based on that, but the county, the population of the city was not excluded from the county's calculation.
So it would almost be like a double pay in my mind for the city of Tampa or the city of St. Petersburg. Just wanted to clarify that.
So I'm sorry, Commissioner Overman.
And that was helpful to understand that it was a per capita. I was going to ask the question of, what year number did we use? It matters a lot when we had, 9,000 people move to Hillsborough County in the first 2 months of 2022. So we got a lot of people moving here. But that, to Commissioner Kemp's point, the 317,380, which is a combination of Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa, is 43% of the ask. So if the city of Tampa's numbers is actually included in Hillsborough County's number 2, instead of it being 317, the total would be the 248, and then of that, the 69 is paid by the city. So that's my question: is It does break it out. But at the end of the day, are we double counting the people who live in the city of Tampa when it comes to the pro rata calculation?
That was just the methodology. The calculation was not intended to count people. It was just based on population. If we excluded the city number from the county number, there would be no net increase in the total that came to TBARTA, because instead of Hillsborough County paying all of it, there would be a portion of it just carved out and assumed by Tampa. So
Which
the
is-
intent that the Finance Committee made back in October was to increase and not to change what the counties were paying, but to add on to it an amount for each of the cities. And so again, this is not a population counting process. It's just a methodology by which a dollar amount is assessed basically to each of the 7 jurisdictions.
Okay, so what does the term per capita mean?
That was the methodology.
Population. Last I checked, it was population. That's why I was like, maybe help me understand. Because my point is, if is there an extra cost because we have a municipality to serve in over above the county? I mean, the city of Tampa is 500,000. Hillsborough County's over a million. So, but it's 1.5 million people. So when I calculate the 317, is that for 1.5 million people?
Ask again?
Okay, so let's say there's a 1.5 million people that live inside of Hillsborough County. Of that 1.5, 500,000 are for round numbers sake, is the city of Tampa. So the 317, which is a combination of the 248 for the Hillsborough and 69,000 for Tampa. Does that reflect the per capita charge for 1.5 million people? Or are we adding 500,000 people for the city of Tampa is my question.
So the way that it's currently written, it would be the 1.5 for Hillsborough and the 500,000. So
we're double counting.
So it would be.
So we're
well,
double counting.
right.
That's why I'm asking.
Right.
That's why the city of Tampa says I'm opting out, because the people are already counted
Well,
in this formula.
Yes, and I think, and you have to bear with me on this one because I wasn't at your October meeting, but I believe that what occurred in coming up with this is you could have chosen any formula you wanted. It didn't necessarily need to be per capita. You could have assigned total values and said, Hillsborough, you're going to contribute X and it's going to increase by this each month. Every year. Same thing with Hernando, with Pinellas, with everyone. And then the cities are going to contribute this other. Instead, what they did is came up with a formula that just said, we're going to base it on population so that that's how we'll get to a fairness rather than arbitrarily assigning a number. It wasn't so much targeted at this is a cost per person like you would in a tax rate or an assessment where you have a cost per household or per person. This was just another way. It was just a way of coming up with some sort of basis to make it fair so that each city and each county's contribution could be calculated easily.
Understood.
Chair recognizes Jim Holton.
Yeah, I'm having a little confusion also, and I understand the methodology, but my question is if the city of Tampa, for example, doesn't pay their contributions, is that added on to the bill for Hillsborough County then to 317, or we just lose that money?
As it's written now, it is not added on. It's just money lost.
Okay, okay. That's
Chair recognizes Commissioner Long.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I clearly understand where our esteemed chair over here is going, because now I'm having the same questions about Pinellas County, because our largest city is the city of St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg being charged for X amount, and then on top of that, the county is being charged for all the residents in Pinellas County, because we have almost 2 million people in our county, a large segment of which, and I don't know exactly the population of the city of St. Petersburg, but what I'm hearing here is a lot of double dipping because we're paying, the county is paying the county unincorporated piece. But keep in mind, in Pinellas County, this is why that's really a flawed formula, David. In Pinellas County, we have 24 municipalities. So we're paying for everybody, but then the city of St. Petersburg is also paying their share. It's double dipping.
And the board.
I'm not arguing with you.
No,
I'm
I
just
understand.
saying, that's cockamamie to me.
Jennifer.
I was just going to say, this is the formula that's been proposed. If there is another formulaic way of providing this, we can certainly do that. If there's going to be, whatever this board wants to present to those other entities as far as having a way of dividing up the payment. I think at the time this was used, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this how it's currently, how the current contributions are calculated for the existing counties. And so that was just carried over for then making the city's calculation. If you back out those cities from the county, then you're basically just lowering the amount the county is paying, giving that payment to the city to pay, and the net that TBARTA is receiving won't change.
So I have a follow-up, Mr. Chair, if I
Commissioner Long.
may. So this is where, and this is just my opinion, I don't know about the esteemed members from Hillsborough, but each of our counties is very different demographically. And you're taking a formula, not you, but the idea, as I understand it, is a formula was developed that just kind of lays the same formula over all 5 counties. Meanwhile, only Hillsborough and Pinellas have a city that's specified in statute. And to me, there's a big unfairness to this whole formula. I'm not saying it correctly, but I think you get my drift, right? Because you have the same thing. Only you have 3 cities, but only Tampa is participating.
Chair's going to recognize Commissioner Flowers and then Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is interesting because if you all recall, I asked, why would we not just back out the 69,000 from Tampa? So this is interesting because I did ask that. That's number one. Number two, I was going back through the archives for the minutes for our finance committee meeting because we did discuss this, and the decision was, and I'm pulling from my memory because I couldn't find the exact verbiage in the archive minutes, but we were asked, the committee was asked, what formula would we prefer to use? And there were 3 options. I was looking for the other 2. The reason that the 17 cents per capita came because the thought was it would be fairer across the board for everybody to have the same measurement versus we're going to ask St. Pete to pay this amount because of XYZ, and we'll do Pinellas County X amount for XYZ. So if it would be my recommendation now, since there's so much discussion now about double dipping, because this isn't an urgent issue, that we take this back to the Finance Committee, Mr. Chair. We look at those 2 additional options plus the per capita, back out the 69,000 and change from Hillsborough County. So instead of Hillsborough being whatever dollar value that is, it would be minus. So it would be the 248 minus the 69, so that dollar amount, and then Tampa for whatever that 69 will be. Do the same for Pinellas and St. Pete. Just have that on the agenda for me if you don't mind, please. And we can discuss those other 2 formulas that were presented to us. But it was presented to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee did pass the formula that you see before you, which is why it's now here before the board. So it wasn't David that made that singular decision. It was the committee that looked at the options that it was presented with in a way to try to be fair. And I know when I went back to Pinellas County Commission and gave my report, that's what I said. But I was trying to look for the specific verbiage because I wanted to provide you all with that. And I'm sorry I couldn't come up with it. But Mr. Chair, that would be my recommendation since there's a conversation, good conversation, because I know the whole while I served on city council in St. Pete, we used to complain that the county was double dipping on us because we maintain our own parks and recreation centers, yet we're paying for those services that we don't receive from the county. So I get it. But Mr. Chair, that would be my recommendation. Of course, please, get additional buy-in from others, but.
Commissioner Kemp
Yes.
and then Jim Holton.
I'd also like to clarify. So currently, each of the jurisdictions makes a yearly contribution. There's not an interlocal agreement that governs that, correct? So it's just a voluntary contribution that each makes. And as I understand it, this interlocal agreement that's been proposed is one that is essentially in perpetuity, that you cannot remove yourself from. Can you describe how that is?
So there is no term of the interlocal. It does go on, as you said, in perpetuity. However, any member can terminate their participation with 30 days notice.
Okay.
Chair recognizes Jim Holton.
Oh, thank you, Chair. My initial concern in the Finance Committee, as everyone knows, was that we're concerned about Tampa not paying and then what kind of precedent that says. But given what I've just heard now, it's inherently unfair for Tampa to pay, and probably for St. Pete too. I think we need to revisit this entire issue, as Commissioner Flowers said, and maybe hold and table this vote on this interlocutory agreement right now until we re-examine that entire situation. Because I, again, had concern about Tampa opting out of this, but Hillsborough County and Pinellas County are being charged double for this if these two cities have to pay. And it's just not, the math does not right. They're not getting extra benefits above and beyond. So I would suggest a full reconsideration of this interlocutory agreement and finance.
She thought her button push would acknowledge that she want to speak.
Council member,
It just turns on the mic, so.
Council member, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. I'm like, okay, I know I'm new, but.
Yeah, you weren't here at the beginning. I'm sorry. It just turned your mic on.
And thank you so much for that. Thank goodness for cell phones, right? So I just want to respond to the conversation that I'm hearing. And I also need point of clarification. So when we use the term double dipping, St. Petersburg would pay that 17% per capita out of its own city budget. The county is also paying, including that 268,000 that we call residents for the city of St. Petersburg. Does the county send money to the city of St. Petersburg? You just pay it. So it's coming out of two financial buckets. So it's really not true double dipping. It's coming from two buckets, but the city is being represented twice in that number. So I wanted to ask that question because I wanted to find out, I wanted to follow the money and to see who was actually paying what. So the county is not being served justice in this if they're paying for St. Petersburg and St. Petersburg is being asked to find, because I'm sitting here thinking, how am I going to propose St. Petersburg paying this money when the county is already paying to represent them? So I do agree with Commissioner Flowers, if we can have additional conversations so I can now go back and present this formula as it was presented today, and then make sure someone, because the Mayor Welch doesn't sit on the Finance Committee, but I would definitely like to be here to engage in that conversation to see how we can rectify the double counting of residents in the proposed new budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So the item today is actually to approve the actual interlocal agreement. The question, however, outstanding is what's the formula for what number goes into each of the agreements? And I think originally the documents were circulated to each of the municipalities or the partners for consideration in terms of whether or not there was an issue associated with the agreement. What we heard earlier was there's no issue with the agreement, the legal language of the agreement. The issue I think we're having now is what number goes in it for each of the parties. So I don't think we'd have to stop doing the agreement. What we have to do is address the financial consideration. But if it's the board's pleasure to do them both at the same time, I see that's reasonable. I just don't know if the agreement actually specifically identifies the methodology for how the calculation was made. So we would be unable to approve the actual agreement, and it would have to be recirculated to the parties for, for methodology if at a future date too.
Yeah, it
So-
does specifically have the methodology in
It
the
does.
verbiage. So you would need to either approve it or not approve it.
Okay, so for simplicity's sake, if we're going to continue to use a per capita number, it would be probably a good idea to add that per capita number to the spreadsheet in it so that it's very clear who's paying for what head in the house. And that might simplify and cause a different decision by possibly our municipalities.
Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I simply wanted to offer a friendly amendment to Commissioner Flowers' recommendation, and that is, why would you not consider just doing pure per capita, like we all understand per capita to mean? And based on the population of St. Pete, they pay that if it's 17 cents, whatever. And then when the county gets its amount of money, whatever the city of St. Petersburg is paying is subtracted out of the rest of our population, so that we are not paying for the city and for county unincorporated. That said, I think it's I'm not quite understanding how all the rest of our 24 cities, we're paying for all of them. So now we'd only be paying for 23 is what I'm gathering here out of this conversation. But that would solve the problem about the so-called formula that isn't really a formula, because it definitely is double dipping. And to Councilor Deborah Fig Sanders' question, the county doesn't pay for the city and send the check to the city. It pays our allocation and sends it directly to TBARTA. So it is double dipping at the height of it all, in
So,
my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner Long.
Yeah.
So there is a lot to be said for how we got here, and really happy to see the interlocal agreement being debated at this level as well. What we're striving for is 100% participation. If we've created some formula that's already created a double dipping concept, we're going to have to fix the formula. But going back and reinventing the wheel seems odd to me. Of course, I'm an engineer, so math, but it seems like all we really have to do is recognize that the city's contributions based on their per capita number, which we've all agreed to, is subtracted from Hillsborough County and subtracted from Pinellas County, and then we're where we need to be. We don't really need to, the formula is fine. I think it was fair for each county and city that participates to have, sort of a benchmark of why we're being billed so much money, what was it based on? But I don't think when the city pays their fair share of a portion of the county's funding, that it shouldn't be credited. So can we move forward as simple as that, or do we have to reinvent the formula to move forward?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion.
Commissioner Flowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead and approve the recommended allocation interlocal agreement with the following changes. For Hillsborough, under the proposed amount, it would be $178,867.71. For Pinellas County, under the proposed amount, it will be $117,521.85. Tampa would remain $69,291.83. St. Petersburg would remain $45,526.34. And all other interlocal partners would remain as proposed in the document.
I have a motion and a second.
Councilman.
Councilman, member
Thank you so
Big
much.
Sanders.
I recognize that and I approve for that. And I do understand that the mission is 100% participation. So with the county actually paying for all of its cities, you pretty much are guaranteed 100% participation. Who's to say or what's to say that Tampa still will come back and say we're still not paying it? Or in St. Petersburg reviewing of the budget, now as an individual payee into that, we're still not going to pay it. Then we're back at an original issue of not having 100% participation. So I guess I'm just trying to understand the rationale of separating two cities out of the other cities and expecting now those cities to pay when you had 100% going into it.
I think
before the change was made.
St. Pete and Tampa were targeted primarily because of their very important footstep, and support. I don't think they should pay twice. So this fixes that issue. I do think if any other city wanted to participate, we'd provide the same courtesy. So if a city wanted to come in and their population was 10,000 and they wanted to do their fair share, each city that would participate in this agreement would then be credited out of the overall contribution.
Okay.
And I think that's fair to anybody that would like to participate. Obviously, St. Pete and Tampa were targeted because of they're huge cities, and we need Tampa and St. Pete to be on board to have any kind of reasonable strategy for funding at the state and federal level.
Okay.
Commissioner Holcomb.
So I'm on board with all the recent conversation, but I believe Mr. Green said that City of Tampa couldn't pay, or can you expound on why they said they didn't pay? Was it a matter of actual dollars that they were taking out of their budget, or is it because they think their residents are charged twice?
They said they didn't have the ability financially to pay.
Okay.
Which is an issue in of itself, but doesn't create anything that we can't vote in our interlocal agreement to try to accomplish. We keep knocking on the door until we get 100% participation, in my mind.
And hopefully the presentations that we asked for.
And we have voted to make presentations.
Yeah,
So we're
hopefully
going
that'll
back
change
to ask again. Chair recognizes
Yeah,
Jim
Chair, and I
Holcomb.
don't want to belabor the point, but I think Flowers' amendment does the trick very, very well by just deducting out. But again, I get to your problem, council member. And what if Tampa or St. Pete just say, or one county says, we don't want to pay, that's fine and good. Then TBARTA has a diminishing role and diminishing funds. I think that we have to look, in addition to these presentations, to some sort of teeth in this amendment, to require folks to pay, or to ask the legislature to take them off a seat at this table if they don't pay. I mean, that's only fair to do. And I think this is on the right step, but we're not there yet in terms of what we need to do.
I agree. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
You're recognized.
I agree with the teeth. Remember, I asked the question, so statutorily, they're required to be a part of TBARTA, but statutorily, they're not required to pay. Yeah. But the only reason I would be hesitant about not having them at the table is because when we go to plan regional transportation activities and efforts, if we've got to go through their communities, we can't just go through their communities unless it's something that FDOT owns. So we would need to have that open line of communication. And I would hate to have a specific community upset with us and not even entertained because they're not present here at the table because we made that decision. I agree. I wish we could find a way to have some teeth where we could actually get some things done and not have to fight every step of the way, because expanding transportation opportunities just really helps our region. I mean, it helps all around. And if folks haven't kind of gotten that yet, I don't know when they will. And then we have some of our other communities who are, going up North County like Hernando, or we have Manatee, especially Manatee, who keep saying, we want something to come over here. And we haven't gotten them anything, but they've been active and they pay into what we're doing. So that's the only reason why I would be hesitant about can't have a seat at the table, because we need them.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, and without belaboring the point, I do think that we have an opportunity here to tighten up our relationship with our Tampa folks, to build more communication with them, and consider it an opportunity to educate. Because I can tell you, and Commissioner Holton, you've been with us, and so have you, Commissioner Flowers. When you go to DC and you're trying to get federal money, the one thing they want to know is that you're speaking as a region. And Harry, you know that better than anybody when we've made those presentations to the transit authority up there, as well as to the congressional people and our United States senators. So we've got to have 100% participation. In my mind, it's just not an option. So we all, as board members, have our responsibility to be talking to the folks in Tampa and getting them on board.
And the subjective, historically, we've kind of approached that from a volunteer basis. We didn't have any structure to offer. So now that we have an interlocal agreement with some structure in it, we're going to roll it out. And we also included in our conversation, present it to the member cities and counties. Because we want them to buy in voluntarily, but I don't disagree at all that we could, visit with the state and say, listen, we've got a regional board. We now have an interlocal agreement. We have agreed with each other that to participate, there's a participation local funding number. And if we could tie it to membership, that would be great. But I think we can move forward with the agreement and the presentations without the teeth right now to see if we can get voluntary participation, which I think would be great. It also works good in Tallahassee when you say all members have participated and they wanted to. Commissioner Kemp, and then I'll come to you.
I'll just say that, I think in Tampa, per se, there's a very negative sense of TBARTA, because TBARTA, and we've gone through this many times, I've been the one vote or two. Commissioner Overman's new, but I've talked about the intense opposition in Tampa to what TBARTA is, basically the single project that is a voice for expanding the interstate footprint from the downtown interchange to Fowler Avenue, which is strongly, extremely, we have 600 people that showed up 2 years in a row to our TPO meeting in opposition. And this is a project that TBARTA keeps pushing forward despite, we've had people come to public hearings. And so it isn't that, if you want to change the perception of TBARTA, I think you're gonna have to think about the projects you're doing, not just asking about a contribution. And then when we have these votes say, oh, we've heard you before, Commissioner Kemp, but okay, we're just gonna vote this. I'll just point that out. It's related.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair recognizes Jim Holton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I think we've come a long way in resolving some of the inherent issues here that we started with a few minutes ago, which is great. But and again, to Commissioner Flowers' point, I don't want to kick anyone off the board and not give a seat at the table. What I want to do is ensure that they follow through with their obligation like everyone else, as a matter of fairness, to pay their fair share. And that said, I think to the chair's point, I think it is really a state legislative matter that we refer this and maybe direct our lobbyists to talk to the state about that in the next session to tighten up this enabling legislation to provide that the members, statutory members, shall pay per this formula that we have adopted, and get them to do it, because it's really not our prerogative to do that. We are a creation of the legislature. But in terms of approving this agreement today, I wholeheartedly support Commissioner Flowers' amendments and all the great discussion we've had here in terms of what we need to do. I think that'll go a long way, perhaps, in maybe persuading Tampa too that there was at least not a mathematical error at play here in their analysis of this whole thing. But then we can discuss, their substantive opposition or favor for this, hopefully with presentations.
The mayor may have several things we need to address, but we need to go at her with a professional presentation and conversation, as Commissioner Kemp has advised. And we need her participation. We need the city of Tampa to participate. It's important. So I have a motion and a second on the floor.
Excuse me, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
excuse-
I'm sorry.
Jennifer.
Yes, before the vote, I just wanted to make a clarification. I know exactly what the direction was with regard to going through the numbers. The numbers aren't actually contained in the agreement because the agreement is meant to go over years. And so it's just the formula that's in there. So in recognizing the direction of the board, if you would consider that I will add the language that's basically states that for a contributor county that has a contributor city within its jurisdictional boundaries, the contributor county will be, or proportionate share will be decreased by the amount of the contributor cities, the amount this contributor city has paid.
Councilmember, that also, I think, opens the door for the participation at any level that you talked about earlier.
So we have a motion on the floor, and with that being added, and there was a part of your recommendation that I totally agreed with, that if the city paid their portion, that it is also credited at the county level. So can we restate the motion so that we have it?
I'll restate the motion and I'll include your language. So I would make a motion that we approve the interlocal agreement for financial contributions with the amended language. Hillsborough County proposed amount would be reduced to 117,000. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's not
I
right.
think so the numbers. are
So
what-
the numbers, keep the numbers, because I done lost my little calculator thing. So keep the numbers that I had before for everybody. And that any contributing county that has a neighboring city that is included in the proportional per capita share within the interlocal agreement, the county's payment has been reduced by that city's per capita payment.
And I think your sentence captured that.
Yeah, but I
For
just
the
included
record,
it.
yeah.
Mhm. So essentially what that means is the city of St. Pete will still pay $45,526. And that amount was decreased from the Pinellas County amount of 163, which brings us down to 117,521.85.
And we'll get credited.
And well, you don't get credit because now we would not be paying that amount at all.
I'm just trying to rethink what the chair's statement was that I totally agreed about, and I'm trying to.
But my statement, Jennifer captured it. So if you'll read into the record just one more time, she's captured in her sentence what I think is fair to move forward with. And remember, we don't have numbers. So this is a perpetual agreement. So it doesn't really have numbers in it. The numbers fall out of the agreement once we interpret the formula, the methodology.
Mhm.
So for the record,
Yes, so for the record, the sentence that will be added to section 2 of the interlocal would be that for the contributor county that has a contributor city located within its jurisdictional boundaries, the contributor county contribution amount will be decreased by the contributor city's contribution amount paid.
is it good? Commissioner Kemp?
So what if the city that you're naming doesn't? Then does that mean, I just think it should just be based on population, which is what we have now. So,
It's still based on population, so the formula doesn't change.
It's per capita.
but
So
what you're saying is,
You
if,
just get a credit if a city decides to participate.
right. So so then we will be, have a large burden. We will be paying for the entire county of Hillsborough if Tampa doesn't.
No, because if Tampa doesn't pay, Tampa just doesn't pay.
Okay, so then we're at 170, 178 no matter what. Okay.
Right, 178, 867,
Okay.
71.
Okay.
I think that's also fair.
I just wanted to be clear. I wasn't
So
clear.
the motion on the table with the clarifications and the second on the table with the clarifications? Are we all clear?
I'll accept the friendly amendment to my motion. The seconder has to also accept.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Robert,
Carries
you know
unanimous.
your rules.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. so
Thank you,
much.
Commissioner Overman.
Chairman, I need to exit also.
Okay, let's need, I have one more action item. I don't want to get down below a quorum. I won't be able to do it. So Chair recognizes Ken Bowden,
Good morning.
and that's our last action item.
What's that?
That's our last action
Oh,
item.
yeah, absolutely. So I have a recommendation in front of the board to approve TBARTA's 22 updates to the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, or Ptasp for short. Every year, the Federal Transit Agency requires public agencies, transit agencies to update, review, and certify their safety plans. The original Ptasp was approved by the board in July of 2020, and an update to the Ptasp was approved in April of 2021. This update has 3 edits to it. One, we've updated the performance matrix table incorporating data from 2021. We've also updated the contact information for our safety hotline. And we have brought the Ptasp into compliance with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which adds the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Florida Department of Health as information resources for public safety. In terms of fiscal impact, failure to comply with the FTA's requirement to annually update and certify the Ptasp could make TBARTA ineligible to receive FTA grant funds. So it's with that staff recommends approval of this 2022 Ptasp.
Chairman,
Chair recognizes Commissioner Holcomb.
just and I think I know where this is going. So just if you could just clarify.
Yeah.
So when we accept federal money in the state of Florida for our counties or what have you, we have to accept guidelines that could come out of the CDC or the other organization you mentioned.
That's correct.
That's why our county bus had to have masks when the whole rest of the county did not require masks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So board members, our last action item has been presented.
Move approval.
Have a motion for approval and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Action items are over, so I'm gonna move on to the chairman's report. I think I've reported enough tonight. So I'm good. Executive Director's report.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't let Earth Day go without announcing that we're conducting our second annual Green Your Commute Challenge from May 15th through the 21st. This is a challenge we started last year as a way to help raise the profile of Commute Tampa Bay and to help employers and their employees realize that there are transportation options that save them money and are better for the environment. The challenge is competitive with 3 size categories for businesses: small, medium, and large. And each company competes with their size category for 2 prizes, those being the largest savings in CO2 emissions and the most money saved in fuel costs. Top place finishers from each size category are also recognized with a certificate. Each recorded trip is a chance to win, and we will select an individual winner at random for a $100 grand prize. And to encourage social media activity, 4 $25 gift cards will be awarded to participants who post their trips on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. So we're offering plenty of incentives to participate. Next, I want to highlight a new staff report that's included in your packet this month, and that was referenced earlier during the Transit Management Committee's report. The unfunded regional transit needs list is something we talked about for a while, and we finally have a draft ready to share along with the regional transit vision map to remind everybody of the opportunities we have in front of us as a region. Our intent is to have the TMC approve a final list and then to include it in your packets each month as a reference of our collective priorities and what projects are most needed in the event funding becomes available for any of them. And then obviously we'll update that list as anything on it changes. And then finally, we are well into our fiscal year 2021 financial audit, as Melanie's been working with our auditors for the past several weeks. We had our official kickoff meeting last week and plan to present the results to the Finance Committee and Board during our May meetings. Next meeting is May 20th at PSTA. We have no new future meeting topics, and that concludes my report unless there are any questions.
Thank you, David. Any questions for David? You have any other items?
Just the presentation that's next on the agenda.
You're good.
No.
Brian, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the February board meeting, Scott Pringle gave a presentation on the proposed concept of operations for the RRT. And that presentation included some discussion about battery electric vehicles. Scott's back today along with Karen Winger, also from WSP. They're going to give a part 2 to that presentation. They took a closer look at what the impacts would be to, for example, to the fleet size, to the total project costs if the board decided they wanted to go fully electric on this project. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott and Karen.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, board. Just like Brian introduced, we're going to quickly go through. We always present the purpose of the Regional Rapid Transit Project in every presentation we do, so you can see that there on screen. Just a quick reminder, this board did adopt the locally preferred alternative in August of last year. You can see that on your map here. In that recommendation was what we call freeway-based BRT lanes in Pinellas County, using the express lanes across the New Howard Franklin Bridge, mixed traffic between West Shore and downtown Tampa, and those freeway-based BRT lanes from north of Tampa to Pasco County. Just like Brian indicated, we gave some information about how the service would operate at the last meeting. And in that, a question to the board was, should we start talking about the types of vehicles that we're assuming in this locally preferred alternative, specifically in terms of going electric? So we did ask that question, and the board did suggest that we move forward and get some more information. So we have that for you today. So I'm very proud to announce and introduce to you Karen Winger. She is our regional lead, the Southeast lead for zero emission vehicles. She has 25 years of experience in the transit industry and actually started her career as a bus operator. So lifelong passion of transit.
Yeah, can't hide it. I get excited no matter what I'm talking about with transit. So so thanks for having me here today. I'm going to go over the analysis that we did on the Regional Rapid Project for reviewing electrification. But before I get into that, I want to talk about a couple things related to the battery electric market in the US in general. It's a very exciting time right now to talk about zero emissions. You heard earlier about all the grant opportunities that's around zero emissions. The battery bus market alone last year during the pandemic saw an increase of 27% in vehicle purchases. So people are still moving forward with their projects. And I don't know if any of you guys went to APTA Expo last fall when it was out in Orlando. There wasn't a single diesel bus on the floor. It was all battery electric and one lone CNG vehicle. So it's definitely the wave of the future. So I'm glad you guys are considering it for this project. The bus options are fairly mature. You can be pretty confident that the bus is going to perform the way they say it's going to perform. Doesn't quite have the range of diesel yet, but batteries are constantly improving. Charging equipment is not as developed yet. There's some charging equipment that has standards, depending on what type of charging equipment you pick, and then some the standards haven't been quite developed. So some of that can be a little easier for installation than others. And then on the other end, business and intelligence, all the data you get on the other side, which is always fun to recognize. The tools around that is developing rapidly. So agencies can both, if the service is deployed, understand real time what's happening to their vehicles, but also too being able to use the data to review, hey, how's this battery performance? This particular bus, there's an issue with the battery, or this operator maybe need some coaching on their performance on how they drive the bus, because the operator can actually have a really big impact on performance. Where's this next slide? We're doing that so seamlessly. Oh, it's right in front of me. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go over these next couple slides. I told us. Here we go. So the next couple of slides you saw from your last presentation, again, just to reemphasize the point, the market's changing. That yellow, that really dark line, the yellow line looks is diesel vehicles, and they're going by the wayside. A lot of people are going to battery electric. In the 40-foot, 35-foot bus market, there's a lot of options. And again, at APTA last fall, there was a lot of paratransit, smaller vehicle options as well. So we have a tool, a modeling tool that can help, because there's a lot of inputs and items that to be considered when you're looking at a battery electric vehicle. So we developed a tool in-house that we've used, and that we've applied this to the Regional Rapid project. And we looked at the current service plan for the Regional Rapid. Florida has some great things going for it in the fact that the topography can have an impact on battery electric vehicles. It's not very hilly in Florida, so that's a good thing for this route. And weather can have an impact, colder climates. So, you know, in New England, you know, any place up north, the wintertime can actually have a really big impact on battery degradation. So you have that another thing that's going for you in this region. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, topography, weather, bus weight, how the driver operates, all factors into that. And the way we did this analysis is for some of those factors, we kind of stepped through the control of it. So next slide, please. We used two buses for this model. It's a New Flyer and Proterra, which is actually buses that can be purchased off the Florida state procurement that was done last, I think December was when it was awarded. And we picked these two vehicles in particular because they can accept on-route charging, which was one of the things we tested in the model. We also assumed when we did the modeling that the vehicles start the day at 100% charge, so they leave the garage fully charged. Some agencies choose to only use on-route charging to keep the battery going. Some use only depot charging, some use a mix. But just to keep a steady factor in the analysis, that's what we assumed. And like I mentioned, electric buses, the performance there's a lot of things that can impact it, the weather, topography, and driver performance can have up to 20% impact. So, you know, when you go with a zero emission solution, having how you coach and continually coach the operators to really take advantage of that regenerative braking that comes with electric vehicles. If you've ever driven like the Prius and you get the little leaves, so you know you're doing good. It's kind of the same thing with the operators. There's that opportunity as well. So the operators and my experience is I find the operators really enjoy being part of that and taking advantage of that solution. So we tested the routes. The first thing we did is we tested the Regional Rapid as is. If we did a one-to-one swap of just a diesel bus for an electric bus, how many buses do we need to add to the fleet in order to do that service without any other changes? So that doesn't include on-route charging. It is a very long route. I knew when Scott sent it to me originally, I was like, we need to do a model run because I'm pretty sure this is going to need something additional to get it through, but you have a big area to connect. So it's an important route. So with that one-for-one assumption, most of the blocks, which is what the bus is assigned to do the piece of work, can't finish the day without any on-route charging. So if they leave the garage first thing in the morning, 100% charge, they're not going to make it back. So that's a problem. In order to complete the service, we need to add a total of 14 additional buses, which is a lot. But I have a better solution for you. So there's things you can do to adjust that. You could adjust the schedule, which I would not recommend because then that's going to provide reduced frequency in the headways, which is not ideal for your customers. But we can add on-route charging equipment. So that means during the course of the day, the bus grabs a little charge here and there where there's layovers, and that helps the bus get through the day with enough energy and get home, which is important to get it home as well. So on the next slide, you can see that if we do on-route charging with the existing equipment, and there's two photos there of buses with on-route charging, we can reduce the additional bus requirement by 7 vehicles. And this is, of course, considering current technologies. Batteries are constantly evolving. The equipment in the buses is constantly evolving and getting lighter. The frequency and speed of charging is constantly getting better. So this is kind of based on current conditions. You would need 7 additional vehicles. I know this project's slated for 2030. My guess is that's going to be in a better position by then too. But So yeah, so that's the two charging equipment up there. With the on-route charging solution, we're recommending a total of 11 on-route chargers to be added. And you'll note some locations have 2 chargers at that location, and some of that is because, you know, we don't want a bus to have to wait for another bus to finish charging so that they can get the charge, because now that's going to delay the service. So the areas where there's 2 chargers located, like at the University Transit Center, West Shore Intermodal Center, and downtown Tampa Intermodal Center, those areas are also areas of a lot more activity. So that's why we proposed to have 2 chargers there. For costs for the equipment, without on-route charging, with the 22 original vehicles, diesel vehicles that were part of the LPA, I did just the cost differential for the electrical bus component on that line, plus the 14 additional vehicles, and then depot chargers, so the chargers at the garage to charge in the morning or overnight. It's a range between 25 and almost $34 million for a solution that has no on-route charging. But on-route charging, the costs are actually less to go electric because you need less additional vehicles. So it's 22 of the original vehicles plus 7 additional, 15 depot chargers to charge them all overnight, and then the on-route charging equipment, which comes out to about $20 to $30 million. And I'm going to turn it back to Scott to bring it home.
Question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Will solar panels on these buses ever work or provide a benefit? I know my RV has one on it, but charges my batteries. In sun.
That's funny. I've been.
Sunshine states. I just wondered if that's ever going to be part of that charging.
It's, you know, there's a lot of, and in the infrastructure bill as well, there's actually grants set aside to promote the advancement of those technologies. You know, some transit agencies have the solar panels just on top of their facility to help charge the batteries of the vehicles when they're back at the garage. So that's definitely something that can be looked at. And there's a bunch of other technologies around that too. So
it's being looked at and not fully developed.
no, that's a pretty like newer nascent technology. But, you know, I will say, as opposed to other transportation or even transit projects like heavy rail, it works well, hasn't changed in 100 years. So you're pretty solid with a project like this going forward. Battery electric buses, this stuff is really developing quickly. So I think in any plan with zero emissions, it's important to know what direction you're going, but be open and be flexible to take advantage of whatever technology advances come along. No problem.
Thank you, Karen. And in terms of the question about solar, you know, I would think we'd want to look to PSTA. There's a lot of conversations about doing solar at their facility now, looking at deploying that. So really, PSTA is a leader in that conversation today. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just, I also had a conversation at our PSTA meetings about us coming together as partners when we're looking at the charging stations, because we also have talked about having those quick charge stations like what you see here, so that they won't have to come all the way back to the yard and go back out. And so we certainly could look at shared costs or increase the availability. So that, you know, because if the whole thing is centered around timeliness and getting persons moving rapidly, then, you know, you want to be able to have a bus sit, charge, and keep moving, not that another bus has to wait, you know, or maybe it's a cloudy day, so it didn't charge completely, you know, just whatever. But we could have more within the zoned areas to get them moving east and west, north or south throughout.
That'd be great. Yeah. And I know PSTA has one fast charger now at the admin building.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Long.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know PSTA is working diligently on applications for some of these grants that Harry spoke about. And it would be my hope and sincere recommendation that we would activate in a more proactive way our interlocal agreement. I think we still have it, don't we, with PSTA, David? And partner with them because they are so far ahead. And we just received another $18 million from the feds, which we're going to put towards the additional electric buses. So we've already got 60 on order, which should be coming in here quite shortly. And so we're ahead of the game. And I think, you know, rather than reinvent the wheel, let's just partner with them.
Yeah, only a couple more slides, Mr. Chair. So this is a quick reminder of where we were with the LPA last year at about $150 million capital costs. And that was assuming those diesel hybrid vehicles. Now, with the information that Karen just presented, there's those two options of going without the fast chargers or the en route chargers. So adding 14 vehicles would bring the project's capital costs up to about 183 million versus doing the en route chargers, which brings the capital costs up to about 180 million. But we did want to make sure we talked about benefits. So within the Federal Transit Administration's guidelines, they do have a lot of metrics and how you calculate environmental benefits from using electric vehicles. This is the numbers here, and that we use the FTA's calculations to determine these numbers. And it's estimating that by going electric for the Regional Rapid Transit Project, you could save almost $600,000 annually on these benefits like air quality, energy savings, and greenhouse gas emissions. So with what we presented today, in summary, you know, absolutely, you know, we really do feel like electric is the way to go. The question is, do you do en route chargers or not? Do you add the 14 vehicles or the 7 vehicles with the chargers? And the truth of the matter is, at least from my perspective, is, you know, again, we're looking at 2030 before we're looking to deploy the Regional Rapid Transit Project service. And I am sure, standing here today, that the battery technology available on those vehicles will be vastly different by the time we get to 2030. So, you know, I think the question may be, we can kind of assume relatively close in price, you know, assume the 14 vehicles or assume the 7 with the en route chargers, just with the understanding that by the time we get to 2030, I think those costs are definitely going to come down. We have a lot more options available to us.
I don't have a quorum anymore to vote on anything for you, but we can provide some input.
Thank you. So is the idea that we, TBARTA, are going to be the operators of the buses that you're talking about here?
I will refer back to a TBARTA board workshop that was held here at the airport several years ago, and that question came up. And I think at that time, the conversation was that the desire wasn't there for TBARTA to be an operator, but work with either somebody like Hertz or PSTA or a third-party vendor to operate the service.
Good.
But admittedly,
Thank
that
you.
was several years ago.
I certainly support any plan where we are integrating charging stations as we go along. We're saving money over the long haul and not just saving money for what you were able to show as it relates to purchasing additional buses, but when you add in other costs and other things that we're able to pull back on with the negative impact on the environment, I think that helps increase our savings. So I support anything that moves towards having those charging stations throughout the community.
No, I'll just wholeheartedly support that as well. And I think we can always upgrade the charging stations too. So we ought to err on the side of having the station available with the assumption we're going to be able to upgrade the level of service at each station.
My preference also, build the infrastructure, including the charging station. Don't throw more buses at it without the proper infrastructure. So Commissioner Long, I see this. Commissioner Long.
Just curious, because Scott mentioned it, and some of you may remember that workshop. I can't remember, Jim, if you were here then or you, but I certainly do remember it. And it occurs to me that that was quite a few years ago. And I'm wondering if we need to do another one, because in listening to Commissioner Flowers just now, I'm reminded that our county has also done a study, much like what you're talking about, Scott, when we talked about transitioning our fleet, our county fleet, from gas or diesel to electric. And so, initially the upfront cost is steep, but the return on that investment is taken care of in a matter of just a couple of years. And so I'm curious about if there's a desire or a need to have another type of a workshop that involves our transit agencies as well as our county partners, because we're all doing a little bit of the same thing. And wouldn't it be nice if we were all working together so we're not duplicating efforts, especially as it relates to these, our 41-mile plan that we've been working on since I started with TBARTA, it seems like. I do think there's a lot of opportunity for partnerships and not to get sidetracked by wanting to do our own thing.
Councilmember, did you have a follow-up comment?
I really didn't have a follow-up comment. And although I am here representing Mayor Welch, I also sit on PSTA. And I remember several of my colleagues engaging in the opportunities of being able to reduce emissions and become more environmentally friendly. So I don't think that you will, and I'm going to step out on a limb here, get any opposition to wanting to do better for our environment and going to electric vehicles. So thank you for that presentation and thank you for the opportunity, Chair.
I think it worked, our footprint in DC in particular is a lot better too. That's where the money's, might as well get lunch. Any other questions, comments? Other comments? Anything else we have to cover, David? That I haven't covered?
That's everything.
Then we are adjourned.
Have a great weekend,
This was
everybody.
nice. Even though I was lost out there, but Mr. Holton and